Chapter 1013. Retreat. Hurry and retreat. Daluan Ruozen's eyes widened and his expression paled. All traces of his previous composure gone. He instantly understood that he had fallen into Wang Chong's trap. A giant ape of this size could not possibly be hidden, and Daluan Ruozen had never imagined that Wang Chong would have placed this Arabian behemoth in an ambush some distance away from the Turkic camp. And he had only arrived with the Wuxian cavalry after making all the necessary preparations. Daluan Ruozen had been so focused on dealing with Wang Chong that he had forgotten about Wang Chong's other tricks. I was still too careless. As expected, I can't rely on any luck when fighting with him. Daluan Ruozen clenched his fists, his brow furrowed in rage. He had originally thought that this operation would be a little too easy, but his desire to kill Wang Chong had still taken the upper hand. If the plan was right and he killed Wang Chong, it would be a massive transformation for the Battle of Talas, and even for Uzun, the Western Turkic Khaganate, and all the other countries bordering the Tang dynasty. All the countries would have one less major threat in the future. Given how Wang Chong was developing, no one would be able to stop him in the future. But this momentary greed had ultimately been used by Wang Chong. Everyone retreat. Daluan Ruozen's eyes were filled with panic. The attack power of the giant ape was simply too astonishing. The several thousand Mutri great cavalry were completely useless before it. Not only that, this time, even Daluan Ruozen was within its attack range. Roar! With a heaven-shaking roar, a massive fist rapidly appeared over Daluan Ruozen's head and smashed down. Prime Minister! Cries of alarm rang out, and Daluan Ruozen grimaced. Although he was intelligent and knew a few martial arts, only his control over stellar energy and precision surpassed that of an ordinary person. His true level of cultivation was simply not high. At the very least, he was far from the level of Huashi Wuzong and Dusong Mangpoch. Beast, stop! A roar came from the distance, and a scimitar shot forward like a bolt of lightning, slamming into the giant ape's fist with the force of a thunderbolt. The immense power of this scimitar actually managed to push the giant ape's fist back several zhang. In the distance, Dusong Mangpoch had a nervous expression on his face as he threw out his scimitar. But Dusong Mangpoch had still underestimated the strength of the giant ape in Wang Chong's hand. Boom! The moment the right hand was pushed aside, the giant ape's left arm swung up with an astonishing momentum and slammed down at Daluan Ruozen. Buzz! The earth quaked, sending a plume of dust several dozen zhang into the air. Wherever the giant ape's iron fist landed, the ground cracked and caved in, tearing open countless cracks. What a pity! As the giant ape's fist descended, Wang Chong's God King Yama couldn't help but sigh. De Wuxia, Huashi Wuzong, and Dusong Mangpoch might be powerful, but the true leader Daluan Ruozen was the greatest threat. He was like the brains of the three, using the most precise method to maximize their strength. In this operation, Daluan Ruozen had been scheming against him. But how could Wang Chong not be scheming against Daluan Ruozen? Prime Minister, how are you? At almost the same time in the distance, Huashi Wuzong let go of his fist, his stellar energy shaking off the dust on his body. As he looked at Daluan Ruozen, Huashi Wuzong showed a hint of deep worry and concern. In that moment just now, Huashi Wuzong had sensed that Daluan Ruozen was in danger, and had suddenly intervened to save him from the giant ape. Huashi Wuzong had followed Daluan Ruozen in managing the Ngari royal lineage for more than 20 years. The two had braved life and death, and faced countless difficulties, forming an extremely deep friendship. From a certain perspective, their relationship had even surpassed that of a superior and subordinate. They were lifelong friends. I'm fine. Daluan Ruozen shook his head, his gaze going past Huashi Wuzong to the distant Wang Chong. At this moment, many thoughts flitted through his mind. Daluan Ruozen was not someone who did not care about his own safety, but from the moment Huashi Wuzong had appeared, Daluan Ruozen knew that he was safe. He was more concerned about Wang Chong. Although the giant ape was invincible, Wang Chong was not. If he gathered the strength of Huashi Wuzong, Dusong Mangpoch, and Du Wuxia, he would still be able to kill Wang Chong. But this thought only flashed through Daluan Ruozen's mind for a moment, before it was obliterated by a voice. Ha ha ha, Daluan Ruozen. Wuxia, Huashu Wizong. And to think that you're imperial great generals, yet you're using numbers to bully him. 3 against 1 young man. And you're not ashamed at all. Come. I Gao Xianji will also accompany you. A resounding voice came from the distance. At first, it seemed to come from several hundred li away, but in the blink of an eye, it had appeared in everyone's perception with astonishing speed. When everyone turned their heads to look, the figure that could destroy heaven and earth like a storm was less than 10,000 meters away from them. In the dim starlight, they could clearly see several figures approaching with astonishing speed. As for the person in the lead, he had a tall stature, and he exuded an imposing manner. His aura, which was as sharp as an unsheathed sword, was enough to make anyone who saw him feel small and in awe. Gao Xianji, Daluan Ruozhen, Huashu Wizong, and Wuxia immediately paled at the sight of the slender figure. Wang Chong and the giant ape were already extremely difficult to deal with, and now that the western region's war god Gao Xianji had joined the fray, the situation was getting worse and worse. Too powerful. He was clearly heavily injured by Abu Muslim, so how could he have recovered so quickly? Wuxia's face contorted in shock. Even Daluan Ruozhen had a look of fear on his face. From the speed and momentum of Daluan Ruozhen's appearance, he had mostly recovered from his injuries. The Anshi war god was even more terrifying than Wang Chong, and with the appearance of Gao Xianji, the other top-class generals of the Tang dynasty were probably not far away. If they didn't retreat now, they really would be left here. Let's go. Daluan Ruozhen's last sliver of thought about dealing with Wang Chong vanished. All the Izan Mutri great cavalry swiftly retreated, but a moment later, a massive Vajra pestle flew through the air and smashed into the ground in front of the retreating Mutri great cavalry. The enormous force of the impact caused this Vajra pestle condensed from stellar energy to plunge deeply into the earth. Roar! Roar! Almost at the same time, the giant ape roared savagely and leaped into the air, landing in another direction where the Mutri great cavalry were fleeing. Rumble! The giant fist smashed into the ground, shattering rocks and sending dust into the air. The dozen or so Mutri great cavalry at the very front were instantly ripped to shreds. The giant ape showed no hesitation, and immediately began to fiercely attack the fleeing Mutri great cavalry. Even though he was not confident that he could stop great generals like Huashu Wizong and Dusong Mangpoch, he was more than enough to deal with the Mutri great cavalry. Even if the Mutri great cavalry could escape, they would have to pay a heavy price. Ah! Miserable screams rang out as the famed Mutri great cavalry were thrown into the air by the giant ape's attacks like straw, falling to the ground like weeds. In just a few short moments, 200 to 300 of these precious Mutri great cavalry had been killed. Kill! This was not the only danger the Mutri great cavalry faced. At almost the same time, Li Sai unsheathed his sword, instinctively grasping this opportunity to gather his army and charge at the fleeing Mutri great cavalry. Stop! A thunderous roar resounded through the night sky, attracting everyone's attention. Brat, do you still not want to take that Chunbin's life? If you don't stop, I'll kill him right now, and then we'll have another battle. Wuxia floated in the air, both shocked and furious. The giant ape had appeared far too abruptly, and now even Gao Xianji had appeared. It was hard to say who would win this battle, but if he did not stop Wang Chong and the giant ape, the soldiers he had brought with him would suffer grievous losses. Buzz! In just an instant, the huge battlefield immediately quietened down. The giant ape that had been attacking like a killing machine in the eyes of the Uzan and Western Turks suddenly stopped, its scarlet eyes fixed on the distant Wuxia. Wuxia, so, you still choose to make a deal? Wang Chong indifferently said. In the blink of an eye, the entire battlefield fell silent. Even Li Sai, Kong Xian, and the others who had already rushed out turned their heads, their attention focused on the two commanders. Even Daluan Ruozhen, Huashu Wizong, and Dusong Mangpoch looked over. Wang Chong had long ago prepared himself for this battle. The only people who could stop this battle were Wuxia and his Chin Bin. I said nothing of the sort. Wuxia's pupils constricted, but he quickly regained his composure. He would never admit to such a thing in front of so many people. Wang Chong only smiled, and gave Dewissely a profound glance. Wang Chong, this is an extremely rare opportunity. No one knows when the giant ape will die. If you want to use his strength to kill the Western Turks and Uzun's men, this is your best chance. A voice as soft as a mosquito suddenly came from next to his ear. Cheng Qianli and Gao Xianji were rushing over from the distance. The Mutri great cavalry on the left and right saw these two, their eyes brimming with fear as they began to retreat. A man's name was like a tree's shadow. There was no one who did not know the names of the two commanders of the Anqi Protectorate Army, and even the Mutri great cavalry felt some apprehension. There's no rush. The giant ape has already killed some of the Mutri great cavalry. Now that they're all prepared, it's impossible to completely wipe them out. The only ones who can move are Dewissely's Turkic cavalry. But if we want to deal with the ordinary soldiers of the Western Turks, we don't need the giant ape. Once we save Chen Bin, we can still wipe them out. Chapter 10:14. This truly was an excellent opportunity to deal with the Western Turks and Uzun soldiers, and reduce the strength of their armies. But the giant ape could only kill for a short time. It would only take 2 or 3 days at most before it died. But Chen Bin's influence on the army would last for a long time. Under his command, the ballista army would be able to kill far more enemies than the giant ape. This is fine. Cheng Qianli hesitated for a moment before nodding. Dewissely, as you wish, I can withdraw my soldiers. But remember, 3/4 to the afternoon tomorrow is the deadline for our transaction. Bring Chen Bin back unscathed, and you will have one last chance to obtain the formation phenomena from me. After 3/4 to the afternoon, all transactions will be null and void. I will never agree to any transaction related to formation phenomena. In addition, if Chen Bin has not returned to my camp by then it will be time for our vengeance. Dewissely, you will pay 100 times the price. Let's go. With a cold snort, Wang Chong turned his head and led his army into the distance. This time, Dewissely, Daluan Ruozhen, and Huashu Wuzong did not try to stop them. All the Mutri great cavalry had long ago scattered, naturally creating a path for them. In the end, even after Wang Chong had led his army into the darkness, neither side moved. Great General. Once Wang Chong had left, Daluan Ruozhen faintly smiled and turned to Dewissely. This simple smile caused Dewissely's heart to thump, and he suddenly had an ill foreboding. The people he had wanted to hide the fact that he had secretly kidnapped Chen Bin from Daluan Ruozhen and Huashu Wuzong. Otherwise, there would have been no need for him to put on such a show. But man proposes, heaven disposes. When dealing with a person like Daluan Ruozhen, one could not rely on luck. Not only had Daluan Ruozhen seen through him, he had even placed him in an extremely passive position. Prime Minister, Dewissely called out, but he could only brace himself and step forward. Haha, I seem to have heard that Qixi Protector General mention the words formation phenomena. If the Great General had told us in advance, perhaps Huashu and I could have given the Great General some advice, and we would have gotten the formation phenomena a long time ago. Daluan Ruozhen gestured to Huashu Wuzong and Dusong Mangpoch, and then led the Mutri great cavalry forward, stopping in front of Dewissely. Dewissely instantly paled at Daluan Ruozhen's words. Daluan Ruozhen's words were very subtle, but his meaning was obvious. I also want a share of formation phenomena. And this was precisely what Dewissely was doing his utmost to avoid. Although the Western Turks and the Uzun had different topographies and altitudes, they were both steppe countries that primarily relied on grazing. Both countries were also renowned for their cavalry. If Dewissely could turn the Western Turkic Khaganate upside down and forge an even stronger Turkic empire with the formation phenomena, there was no doubt that Daluan Ruozhen and the Uzun could do the same. Prime Minister truly has a good eye. As expected, nothing can be hidden from Prime Minister. Even if Prime Minister didn't say anything, I was prepared to tell Prime Minister in a little while. Alas, this brat is still too crafty. Although he was extremely unwilling, Dewissely could only brace himself and speak. Although Daluan Ruozhen's martial arts were negligible, in terms of intelligence, not even Dewissely could gain the upper hand. Rather than being discovered by Daluan Ruozhen and forced into a passive position, It was better to be honest. Great general speaks the truth. After all, he is the son of heaven's disciple that Emperor Tang personally conferred. He truly isn't that easy to deal with. Dalawan Ruozhen faintly smiled, exuding an extraordinary bearing. Dewissely was prepared to tell him of his own volition, but Dalawan Ruozhen would not believe a single word. But whether it was Dalawan Ruozhen or Dewissely, both of them were smart enough to ignore this point. As long as Dewissely was willing to share a piece of the pie, for Dalawan Ruozhen, nothing else mattered. After exchanging pleasantries with Dewissely, Dalawan Ruozhen quickly left with his troops. Sir, Dalawan Ruozhen said that Wang Chong is cunning, but I'm afraid he himself is the most cunning. We were planting trees in front of him, but he didn't do anything. Instead, he came to pick the fruit. This is too despicable. When Dalawan Ruozhen and the others left, Chekin Benba finally couldn't help but say angrily, "Yes, these Uzum people are really going too far. Do they really think they can eat us?" Shamshak echoed, his face seething with rage. But Shamask had barely finished speaking when a slap slammed into his face, the immense force of the slap causing Shamask to stagger. Shamshak covered his face in shock. "Bastard thing." Dewissely glared at Shamshak, his expression icy. "If you hadn't failed to live up to expectations, and lost to an Imperial Marshal Tang people, making a joke of yourself in front of the Uzun, they would never have become so impudent." Shamshak's face was red, his mouth opened and closed, but not a single word came out. Dewissely paid no attention to Shamshak. With a flick of his sleeve, he strode toward the center of the camp. At the same time, Tinsum Li from the Western Turkic camp, Dalawan Ruozhen, and Hueshu Huaitsang were leading a group of Mutri Great Cavalry toward the camp of the main army. Dewissely seems to be very unwilling. Halfway there, Hueshu Huaitsang suddenly said, "It would be strange if he was willing. He was guarding against us in this deal with formation phenomena." Dalawan Ruozhen faintly smiled. "But even if he's unwilling, it's no longer up to him." Dusong Mangpoj suddenly interjected. Dalawan Ruozhen's schemes had always been closely linked. If they succeeded in tonight's operation, they could kill Wang Chong. And even if they failed, they could still extract benefits from Dewissely. Even if Dewissely was extremely unwilling, he would still have to agree. Dusong Mangpoj had no choice but to admire this. But formation phenomena are no small matter, and our two empires are far too similar. One mountain cannot hold two tigers. Given Dewissely's style, will he really be willing to give it to us? Dusong Mangpoj suddenly thought of something and spoke. The entire army fell silent, and Dalawan Ruozhen suddenly stopped on his horse. This sudden movement immediately attracted the attention of the army. Hueshu Wazong, Dusong Mangpoj, and all the Mutri Great Cavalry stopped. All eyes focused on Dalawan Ruozhen. "Haha, won't we know when the time comes if he's willing?" Dalawan Ruozhen faintly smiled, and then he urged his horse to gallop into the distance. Behind him, Hueshu Wazong and Dusong Mangpoj glanced at each other and quickly followed. It was high noon, and the scorching sun scorched the earth. A massive dragon banner was thrust into the east side of the city of Talas, atop the high hills. Wang Chong stood beneath the dragon banner, Gao Xinji, Cheng Qianli, the other Tang dynasty generals, and the Wuxian cavalry at his side. All of them stood motionless, silently gazing to the east as they waited. "Marquis, will Dewissely and the others not come?" After some time, Xue Qianjun suddenly broke the silence. He slowly raised his head to the sky, a hint of worry in his eyes. The blazing sun hung high in the sky, and it was already close to a quarter to the noon hour. This was the time that Wang Chong had said would be the final transaction, but there was still no sign of Dewissely or Chen Bin. "Relax, he will come," Wang Chong indifferently said. His calm tone caused Xue Qianjun and the surrounding generals to calm down, the anxiety in their hearts lessening. Wang Chong was not blindly confident, nor was he overly trusting of Dewissely. Instead, he had come to this conclusion after careful consideration. After fighting alongside Chen Bin for so long, Wang Chong knew that Chen Bin would rather die than open his mouth. Dewissely was far too greedy. If he could not get what he wanted from Chen Bin, he would definitely take the initiative to make a deal with Wang Chong. Look, just as everyone was waiting, someone suddenly pointed into the distance and shouted, A moment later, the earth began to quake and dust began to churn. On the distant horizon, one could see a vast army surging toward them like a surging tide. It's the Western Turks. No, there's also Uzun's men. Everyone looked into the distance and suddenly exclaimed. In the distance, they could see two large banners flapping in the wind amidst the roiling dust. One was the banner of a golden wolf with a blue background, while the other was the sacred banner of a white yak with a black background. The mood instantly turned grave. After fighting with the Uzun and the Western Turks for so many days, they were all extremely familiar with the tactics of both sides. Uzun's Mutri great cavalry rode side by side, their armor gleaming with a cold metallic light. Around 2,000 zhang from Wang Chong's group, Dawusili and Daluan Ruozan stopped. Everyone swept their gazes over Wang Chong's group, quickly passing over the hill to look at the giant ape in the back. What's going on? Why isn't this beast dead yet? Dawusili's face was filled with viciousness and deep apprehension. The Arabs had a total of 4 behemoths, but the first 3 had been killed. For some reason, the last giant ape was still alive. In terms of pure strength, no one on the battlefield, not even Dawusili, was a match for this beast. Dawusili did not dare to get his army too close, and he had to be prepared to retreat at a moment's notice to avoid being ambushed by this beast. Great General, let's go, Daluan Ruozan said with a smirk on his face. Dawusili hesitated for a moment, but despite his reluctance he still nodded. Hiya. Chapter 10-15. Marquis, they've brought Chenbin here. Almost at the same time Li Sai, who was on the high hill, also spoke. His eyes immediately fell on Chenbin, who was standing beside Dawusili. Although Chenbin's hands and feet were bound, and even his eyes were blindfolded, Li Sai could still recognize Chenbin, who was sitting on Dawusili's horse at a glance. He looks fine. Although he's suffered some superficial wounds, he's generally fine. Gao Xinji also spoke after a moment of silence. From the moment Dawusili appeared, he had been observing Chenbin, who was standing beside Dawusili. With Gao Xinji's level of cultivation, he could tell at a glance whether Chenbin was seriously injured or not. Wang Chong nodded. He patted the horse's back and galloped forward at high speed. Let's go. It's time to switch back to Chenbin. Under the blazing sun, plumes of smoke and dust rose into the air. Just 1,000 zhang away from the two camps, Wang Chong and Dawusili met. In an instant, the atmosphere was tense. Everyone's eyes were focused on Wang Chong and Dawusili. They all held their breaths, not daring to breathe too loudly. Kid, I've brought him here. Where's the formation phenomena I wanted? Dawusili said coldly, looking at Wang Chong, who was 10 steps away. Although he looked normal on the surface, Dawusili's brows revealed a hint of irritation and anger that could not be concealed. Ever since he had kidnapped Chenbin, Dawusili had tried everything he could think of, hoping to pry the secrets of formation phenomena from Chenbin's mouth. However, no matter what Dawusili did, he could not get a single word out of Chenbin. The most he got was Chenbin's laughter and mockery. Given Dawusili's temperament, he simply wanted to hack Chenbin into pieces to vent his anger. However, Wang Chong's words before he left had caused Dawusili to have many misgivings. Every time he interrogated Chenbin, he had no choice but to expend a great deal of energy to treat Chenbin's injuries and help him recover. Dawusili had spent more than 20 years pursuing the secret of formation phenomena. This secret was far too important to him. So much so that Dawusili could not tolerate any mistakes. Marquis, do not give him the formation phenomena. My life is not important, but please do not let him have his way no matter what. Just then, Chenbin suddenly shouted. His eyes were blindfolded, and he couldn't see what was happening outside. But Chenbin kept his ears open and listened carefully. Chenbin had persevered for so many days and endured the torture to prevent Dawusili from succeeding. If Wang Chong agreed to the deal with Dawusili, wouldn't all his previous efforts be in vain? Shut your mouth. Dawusili jabbed out with his finger, instantly sealing off Chenbin's limbs and mute acupuncture points. Wang Chong, I've already brought him to you. You won't go back on your word, right? Dawusili wanted to kill Chenbin, But what he feared the most was that Wang Chong would suddenly change his mind and cancel the deal. Dewissely, I naturally keep my word. But do you still remember what I said last night? I said finish. Good. Nothing. Damage. Wang Chong coldly said. Kid, don't try to act innocent after getting what you want. When I brought your subordinate back from the battlefield, he was already on his last breath, not far from death. This happened while you were fighting the skyquaking giants. And it had nothing to do with me. I spent a great deal of energy to treat your subordinate, so he deserves a word of thanks from you. Dewissely said. Wang Chong's eyebrows rose as he subconsciously glanced at Chun Bin. The skyquaking army was descending from the sky, launching long-range attacks. And the giant ballistae guarded by Chun Bin and Sukhi were the main targets of the skyquaking giants. Wang Chong was well aware of this. Wang Chong only needed a glance to know that Dewissely was not lying, and his expression relaxed. Very good. Dewissely, I always keep my word. The secret of formation phenomena is here. So hand over my subordinate. Wang Chong faintly smiled as he reached into his bosom and took out a thin sheet of snow paper. Holding it between his index and middle fingers, he raised it high into the air. The mood instantly changed. Dewissely stared at the folded sheet of paper, his eyes blazing. Even Dalawan Ruozan slightly raised his head, a serious expression on his face. Although Dalawan Ruozan had maintained his composure this entire time, if Uzan could obtain the true secret of formation phenomena, it would be an irresistible temptation for Uzan. Time seemed to stop, and even breathing became ragged. The ordinary sheet of paper in Wang Chong's hand instantly became the undisputed center of attention. On the other side, even though Chun Bin's mute acupoint was sealed, and his body was under Wang Chong's control, his hearing wasn't affected. Even though Chun Bin couldn't speak, his body was clearly trembling. Dewissely, you only have one chance. Have you still not thought it through? Wang Chong waved the sheet of paper in his hand. In an instant, as if awakening from a dream, everyone turned their heads around. The secret of formation phenomena, the thing that Dewissely had dreamed of the most in his life, was now within reach. At this moment, Dewissely found it hard to remain calm. As he gazed at the thin snow-white paper, a hint of desire appeared in his eyes. Without hesitation, Dewissely shook his wrist and instinctively reached for Chun Bin on horseback. Wait! Just as he was about to hand Chun Bin over, Dewissely's heart skipped a beat, and he snapped out of his daze. Kid, how do I know if what you're giving me is real? The atmosphere froze in an instant, and the initial frenzy dissipated. Everyone's eyes became calm. That's right. Only Wang Chong could master the secret of formation phenomena. No one knew if it was real or not. If Wang Chong used a fake one to fool them, no one would be able to tell the difference. Dewissely was no fool. He had to be on his guard. Ha! Wang Chong faintly smiled, and under the reluctant gazes of the crowd, he slowly put away the snowy paper. His expression was calm and unruffled, as if he had already predicted this development. Dewissely had a suspicious personality, and an imperial great general of this level was not easy to fool. I just knew that Lord Protector General wouldn't trust me so easily. With a flick of his wrist, Wang Chong tossed out another sheet of paper. Strengthened by his stellar energy, this thin sheet of paper was no different from steel. Swish! The paper whistled through the air as it shot toward Dewissely's face. Confused, Dewissely extended a finger and caught the paper that Wang Chong had thrown at him. What's this? Dewissely asked, a look of confusion on his face. Around him, Dalawan Ruozan, Huashu Wazong, and the others also looked over. No one knew what Wang Chong was up to with the two letters, one at the front and one at the back. This sheet of paper records part of the secret of formation phenomena. Dewissely, you have 7,000 celestial wolf cavalry under your command. Pick 60 of them, and have them cultivate according to the method written here. You'll soon know if it's real or fake. These words took everyone by surprise. Not even Dewissely had expected such a move. Prime Minister, what's going on? On the other side, Dusong Mangpoch frowned and subconsciously lowered his voice. I don't know. Let's wait and see. Dalawan Ruozan said, his brow creasing. This matter was somewhat different from what he had expected. Not even he could understand Wang Chong's actions. Up ahead, Dewusley did not think so much. He gave Wang Chong a profound glance and waved his hand behind him. Soon, 60 fully armored celestial wolf cavalry galloped out from the rear, brimming with energy. Cultivate according to the method written here. Dewusley only glanced at the paper before handing it over to a celestial wolf cavalry officer in the rear. Yes, my lord. The 60 celestial wolf cavalry received the order and galloped away. They took up formation and began to cultivate according to the method written on the paper. All was quiet as everyone focused their attention on the 60 celestial wolf cavalry. Dalawan Ruozan, Huashu Wazong, Dewusley. Everyone was paying attention to the development of this matter. Only Wang Chong silently smiled at the distant celestial wolf cavalry. As an elite force of cavalry that could dominate the world, the celestial wolf cavalry were the cream of the crop in terms of strength, experience, and comprehension. By using Wang Chong's formation phenomena on them, they could be used to their greatest potential in the shortest amount of time. Time passed by, and soon enough, the 60 celestial wolf cavalry finished their cultivation, each of them undergoing a subtle transformation. My lord, we're ready. The celestial wolf cavalry officer rode over and respectfully reported to Dewusley. Dewusley's eyes flashed like lightning as he swept them over. At this moment, his eyes were filled with bewilderment. When Wang Chong had first tossed the paper over, Dewusley hadn't paid it much attention, but when he saw the transformation of the 60 celestial wolf cavalry, Dewusley couldn't help but begin to doubt it. He could clearly sense that after cultivating the contents of Wang Chong's paper, everyone's aura had clearly grown thicker and more profound. Even with Dewusley's experience and knowledge, he had never seen any technique that could cause such a massive transformation in the celestial wolf cavalry in such a short time. Begin! Dewusley waved his hand. At this moment, not even he realized that he had unwittingly developed a hint of anticipation. Boom! A moment later, the 60 celestial wolf cavalry formed into a formation and began to gallop off into the distance. After traveling 100 meters, the celestial wolf cavalry let out a fierce roar. In a flash, a powerful energy of the world surged through the air, connecting the officer and the 60 celestial wolf cavalry together. Clang! The 60 celestial wolf cavalry pulled out their weapons and pointed them at the sky. Rumble! A moment later, something that left everyone stunned occurred. There was a thunderous boom. 30 meters above the celestial wolf cavalry, black clouds began to gather from all directions, gathering above the celestial wolf cavalry. This phenomenon immediately vanished, but everyone present, whether it was Dewusley or Dalawan Ruozan, was stunned. Formation phenomena. Chapter 10:16. Shock. Everyone was shocked speechless by this sight, and the dignified atmosphere instantly became subtle. Even the look in Dalawan Ruozan's eyes had changed. Dewusley, what do you think? Wang Chong withdrew his gaze from the distance and looked at Dewusley with a grin. Dewusley gave Wang Chong a deep look, then suddenly smiled. Kid, you're quite lucky that someone is willing to trade something like formation phenomena for your life. With a tug of his right hand, Dewusley instantly tore off the black cloth covering Chun Bin's eyes. At the same time, he reached out and unsealed Chun Bin's mute acupoint, then released him. Marquis, no, you can't give him the formation phenomena. As soon as he opened his eyes, Chun Bin shouted angrily and anxiously. The matter of formation phenomena was extremely important. He had endured the pain and torture, refusing to reveal it, all to prevent the secret of formation phenomena from falling into Dewusley's hands. If Wang Chong gave the secret of formation phenomena to Dewusley, then all his previous efforts would be wasted. Dewusley, I definitely won't let you have your way. Seeing that the deal was about to be completed, Chun Bin's eyes flashed with determination. With a thought, he suddenly bit down on the root of his tongue. But in the next moment, before Chun Bin could bite his tongue to commit suicide, a hand like an iron clamp clamped down on Chun Bin's lower jaw. You want to commit suicide in front of me? A voice resounded in his ear. Dewusley smiled coldly, and Chun Bin's heart instantly sank. Wang Chong, you have guts. As long as you give me the real formation phenomena, I'll return your subordinates to you. How about it? Duwissely turned his head and looked at Wang Chong said. All right. Wang Chong smiled calmly. Even in front of Duwissely, the Heavenly Wolf General, his aura was not inferior in the slightest. I'll give you the first half of the mystery of formation phenomena first, and I'll give you the other half after you've sent my subordinates down. As soon as he finished speaking, Wang Chong took out the letter from before. With a wave of his hand, it transformed into a streak of white light that shot toward Duwissely. Duwissely stretched out his hand and subconsciously took it. Unlike before, Duwissely opened the letter and read it carefully. A few moments later, Duwissely took the first sheet of paper from the Celestial Wolf Cavalry officer and carefully compared the two sheets of paper. When Duwissely did that, everyone remained silent, waiting for his answer. Unbelievable. I thought that the art of formation phenomena was lost. I didn't think that I would be able to obtain the supreme secret of the formation in a place like Talas. Duwissely's mind was in turmoil as he gripped the two letters. As one of the three supreme great generals of the Western Turkic Khaganate, Duwissely's vision and experience far surpassed that of an ordinary person. Gold, jade, or beautiful women would find it very difficult to move Duwissely's heart. Even the most supreme of weapons would find it very difficult to move Duwissely's heart. But as he looked at the two letters in his hand, that had cost no more than one tael of silver, Duwissely's heart began to thump. Formation phenomena. Duwissely had spent more than half his life searching for it to no avail. But now, he held it in his hands, and he was only missing the last part. Duwissely still had his vision and experience, so Duwissely only needed a glance to know that the first half of what Wang Chong had given him was real. The concept of these words, and the mysteries of the great Tao, and the principles of the world, were not things that Wang Chong could fabricate in such a short time. No one could fabricate these words. The level and concept of these words clearly surpassed that of Duwissely's celestial wolf illusory formation, enough to make any formation on the continent pale in comparison. Most importantly, the concept of all the words flowed smoothly like flowing water, and they came from the same source without any flaws. If this technique had been fabricated in a single night, Duwissely would have no choice but to prostrate himself in admiration. Even if it was fake, he would accept it. This could only mean that Duwissely's eyesight was too poor. Even if he had been tricked, he deserved it. Or perhaps Wang Chong had known 3 or 4 months ago that he would come to Talas and coveted the formation phenomena. So he had spent a great deal of time and effort to prepare this formation phenomena to deal with him. But that was far too absurd. Brat, I can give him to you. Duwissely raised his head and smiled, at the same time putting the two letters into his bosom. But how do I know that the second half of your book is real, and that you didn't tamper with it? If it's fake, wouldn't all my efforts have been for nothing? Duwissely, you're being too paranoid. I've already given you the first half, and you've tested the power of formation phenomena, but you still haven't released the person. How do we know that you won't release him? If you take the item but don't release him, won't we suffer even greater losses? Anshi Vice Protector General Chung Qianli couldn't bear to watch any longer and finally interjected. The Tang dynasty had already displayed sufficient sincerity, but it seemed like Duwissely wanted even more. This was simply pushing his luck. Haha, Duwissely, you didn't see it, so of course you wouldn't know. Wang Chong finally spoke. His expression was calm, as if he had known that Duwissely would ask this question. The second half might be fake, but it also might be real. Duwissely, you have a paranoid personality, and I don't intend to convince you otherwise. You can choose to end the transaction right now. I won't get the person, and you won't get the formation phenomena, leaving us with nothing. But you can also choose to believe me and take a risk. This way, I can get my person back, and you can get the real formation phenomena. Make your choice. Duwissely's expression froze. He had never imagined that Wang Chong would be so calm as to say that the second half might be fake. This caught him off guard, and he didn't know how to respond. If he had heard Wang Chong say these words in the past, he would have immediately turned and left. But now that he had seen the vast concept and power contained within the two scrolls of formation phenomena, Wuxia found it impossible to so easily withdraw. Brat, aren't you being too arrogant? I've already obtained the contents of the 2 scrolls of formation phenomena. If you dare to speak to me like this, aren't you afraid that I'll kill him? Wuxia slowly turned his head to look at Chen Bin, his eyes turning cold. At some point, his fingers had begun to clench, sending a stream of energy to his fingertips. If he tightened his grip, Chen Bin's bones would shatter and he would die. Hey, Wuxia, Chen Bin is my subordinate, and I value him greatly, but to you and the Western Turks, he's just an insignificant nameless pawn. To exchange an insignificant pawn for a scroll of formation phenomena, Wuxia, you've already profited greatly. Are you willing to kill him? Wang Chong grinned, his sharp eyes stabbing into Wuxia's heart like swords. On the other side, Dalawan Ruozen's eyes twitched at Wang Chong's words, a hint of interest flashing through his eyes. Wuxia still didn't understand Wang Chong at all. Argue with him? Not even Dalawan Ruozen was a match for him, much less Wuxia. Haha, okay. Just as Dalawan Ruozen had predicted, Wuxia laughed and made his choice. Brat, I can make a deal with you, but we'll exchange the person and the item. I'll count to 3, and when I reach 1, I'll throw you your subordinate, and you'll throw me what I want. We'll work together, and no one is allowed to play any tricks. If I discover that what you're giving me is fake, I'll first kill Chen Bin, and then I'll kill all your subordinates. Haha, of course. If I discover that you won't release him, or try to kill him midway, I'll destroy the letter, and you'll never obtain the formation phenomena. This will be my first and last time making a deal with anyone. Wang Chong waved his sleeve and smiled. In the end, Wuxia had been unable to resist the temptation of the formation phenomena. But as long as he could save Chen Bin, it would all be worth it. At the final moment, Wang Chong and Wuxia, the 2 supreme commanders of the Tang dynasty and the Western Turks, had finally reached an agreement. But the atmosphere had not relaxed in the slightest. On the contrary, it had reached a fever pitch. Qianli, get ready. If something goes wrong, immediately stop Wuxia and save Chen Bin. While everyone's attention was focused on Wang Chong and Wuxia, no one noticed that Gao Xianji, who had been standing behind Wang Chong this entire time, had used a secret technique to whisper into Cheng Qianli's ear. Wang Chong and Wuxia had reached a deal amidst the calm, but few people noticed that beneath this calm surface was boundless killing intent and turmoil. Wuxia and Wang Chong had agreed to a count of 3 before attacking. One hand over the person, the other hand over the item. In that brief moment, Wang Chong could only draw Wuxia's attention to the formation phenomena written on the letter, and convince him that it was real. Only then could Wang Chong succeed. But if Wuxia felt that he had been tricked, or that what Wang Chong had given him wasn't real, then he would definitely attack Chen Bin. In that instant he would definitely turn around and attack Chen Bin. At that time, Chen Bin would assuredly die. Moreover, because Chen Bin was already in his hands and closest to him, not even Gao Xianji would be able to save him. Understood. Cheng Qianli nodded almost imperceptibly, a grave expression on his face. 3. A voice that was as heavy as iron, and resounding suddenly resounded between heaven and earth. With this voice, the deal between Wang Chong and Wuxia began. The atmosphere suddenly became heavy and somber. Kacha! Wuxia's well-defined fingers tightened around Chen Bin's neck. His expression was cold, completely different from when he had been negotiating with Wang Chong. Kacha! Chapter 10:17. 2. As Wuxia called out the second number, the atmosphere grew even more somber. Everyone remained motionless, but an invisible tension began to spread through the air. Everyone's eyes sharpened, no longer showing the slightest laziness. At this moment, whoosh! Wang Chong suddenly took the third and final piece of paper from his bosom. The frosty white paper was extremely thin, and in the sunlight, one could faintly make out the tiny lines of words within. Wuxia blinked, and then, as if attracted by some invisible energy, he couldn't help but look over. At the same time, the others began to look over. Formation phenomena. Only with this final scroll would the formation be complete. Formation phenomena, represented a high level of formation mastery. It was not just a chant or a powerful formation. If one could comprehend its secrets, the celestial wolf illusory formation, that the Western Turks were renowned for would be able to reach an even higher level and form their own formation phenomena. At that time, the celestial wolf cavalry would be even more difficult to stop. And the Izin's great scarlet sun formation was on the same level as the celestial wolf illusory formation, but it had also not reached the highest level. If one could obtain the secret of formation phenomena, they could also reach an even higher level and form their own formation phenomena for the great scarlet sun formation. This was a temptation that no one could resist. Prime Minister. In the rear of the group, several dozen zhang away from Huashu Wuzong and Dusong Mangpoj, Huoba Sengji's eyes flickered, and he subconsciously licked his lips, a hint of desire on his face. Although he had come to avenge and kill the Wuxian cavalry to uphold the reputation of the Izin Empire's cavalry, if he could comprehend formation phenomena and bring the great scarlet sun formation to an even higher level, why wouldn't he be happy? After all, the Izin Plateau also had legends of supreme formations. 1. Finally, it was the final moment. The atmosphere instantly became tense. Wang Chong, De Wisili, Gao Xianji, and Huashu Wuzong all tensed their muscles like a fully drawn bow. Boom! In the time it took for a spark to fly off a flint, the air rumbled. The first to make a move was not De Wisili, but Wang Chong. Qi. In a flash of white light, the final letter flew out of Wang Chong's hand. However, this letter was not directed at De Wisili. Instead, it was directed diagonally in an empty direction. De Wisili's eyelids twitched, and he was instantly attracted by the letter. His expression seemed calm, but there was a hint of nervousness between his brows. A ball of light flickered in Wang Chong's hand as he aimed it at the letter floating in the air. It seemed like he was prepared to make a move at any moment to destroy the formation phenomena. Peng! Without any hesitation, De Wisili flicked his wrist and sent Chunbin flying from his horse by a hair's breadth. Wang Chong, you can have your man, but give me the formation phenomena. Du Wusili had thrown Chunbin in the opposite direction of the letter Wang Chong had sent him. His voice boomed through the air as Du Wusili tossed Chunbin toward a deserted area. Moreover, there was a great distance between him and Wang Chong's letter. If Wang Chong had wanted to save Chunbin, he would not have had the time to destroy the third letter containing the formation phenomena. Similarly, if De Wisili had wanted to obtain the formation phenomena, he would not have had the time to kill Chunbin. On this point, both Wang Chong and De Wisili had clearly thought of the same thing. Boom! In a flash of light, the two experts, Wang Chong and De Wisili, shot through the air at the same time. One pounced on Chunbin, the other on the third letter in the air. In a battle between experts, every second mattered. For experts of Wang Chong and De Wisili's level, far too many things could happen in a single second. Their top priority was to obtain what they wanted. Wang Chong, eat my halberd. De Wisili was overjoyed to see Wang Chong pounce on Chunbin. Just as the two passed each other and were closest to each other, De Wisili did not hesitate to gather all the stellar energy in his body and pour it into the black halberd in his hand. In the blink of an eye, the black halberd transformed into a furious dragon, dragging a long tail of flames behind it as it ruthlessly shot towards Wang Chong. Almost at the same time, there was a heaven-shaking roar. In the instant that De Wisili leaped forward, there was a flash of light as Wang Chong rapidly transformed into God King Yama. Boom! His left palm blocked the full-force strike of De Wisili's black halberd, while the huge Vajra pestle in his right hand smashed towards De Wisili. Do it! In a flash, Wang Chong and De Wisili were not the only ones to act. Behind De Wisili, Shamshak and Chekim Benba had been staring at De Wisili's left palm. Upon receiving De Wisili's signal, the two brigadier generals of the Western Turkic Khaganate immediately lunged at Chunbin, who had been thrown into the air by De Wisili like hungry tigers. The more Wang Chong cared, the more it proved how important Chunbin was. Most importantly, if Chunbin was killed in front of them, it would deal a massive blow to the morale of the entire Tang dynasty army. For this reason alone, it was worth it for the two of them to kill Chunbin. Shameless scoundrel. You dare. Next to Wang Chong, Cheng Qianli's eyes flashed with cold light as he charged at Chen Bin. The atmosphere on the battlefield instantly became tense. But the greatest variable in this transaction was the silent Gao Xianji. There are some things that don't belong to you, Dewisili. Don't get carried away by your wishful thinking. A dignified and aloof voice resounded in everyone's ears. Boom! Gao Xianji's body exploded forward, moving faster than anyone else's. The moment he lunged forward, all the experts on the battlefield instantly paled in comparison to the storm of energy unleashed by Gao Xianji. Damn it! Dewisili's face contorted. There were countless experts in the world, and every empire and faction had its own elite great generals. But of all these great generals, Gao Xianji was the most enviable. Even Abu Muslim treated Gao Xianji with utmost respect, so one could easily imagine his strength. Gao Xianji, I've already released him. Do you want to break the agreement? Dewisili's heart tightened. He had originally been a little suspicious, but Gao Xianji's reaction had dispelled any of his doubts. If this wasn't a real formation phenomena, why would a top-class great general like Gao Xianji be so nervous as to personally snatch it? Gao Xianji, don't even think about it. Dewisili's muscles tensed up and his veins bulged. He no longer dared to tangle with Wang Chong, and his body shot forward with astonishing speed toward the letter in the air. Dewisili's reaction was fast enough, but there was someone else who reacted even faster than Dewisili. Huashu Wuzong's body was tense. By the time Dewisili had counted to 2, he had been ready to strike. But Gao Xianji's attack had caused Huashu Wuzong to change his target from Wang Chong and Chen Bin to Gao Xianji. Rumble! The ground suddenly shook, and a golden saber chi shot out majestically, chopping at Gao Xianji in the air. Boom! 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 Amidst the violent explosions, the two's auras clashed heavily. Peerless saber chi and force chi swept out in all directions. The dust from the explosions surged and covered the sky. Damn it! My formation phenomena! Dewisili's face was fraught with anxiety. Without the slightest hesitation, golden stellar energy erupted from his body, transforming into a golden barrier that blocked the shockwaves. At this moment, Dewisili had chosen to use his stellar energy to block the shockwaves of the clash between the two great generals. Bzz! Dewisili's body shot forward, his 2 fingers grabbing the letter in the air, and then swiftly drawing it into his palm. As he felt the peculiar abrasiveness of the paper in his palm, Dewisili felt like a great burden had been lifted from his heart. Let's go! The moment the second scroll of formation phenomena was in his hand, Dewisili immediately used the Celestial Wolf's divine procession and shot forward like a bolt of lightning. Dewisili didn't even care about Chen Bin. Of course, most importantly, Dewisili could already see a massive monster approaching the battlefield. Roar! The gigantic beast roared. Before anyone could react, a black shadow grew bigger and bigger, falling from the sky and landing heavily on the ground. The heavy body was like a meteor crashing into the ground, causing the earth to quake. Giant Ape, Shamshak and Che Kuan Benba, who had been fighting with Cheng Qianli, felt their hearts tremble at the sight of this mountainous figure. The fighting spirit in their hearts immediately vanished, and they immediately turned and fled. The giant ape possessed peerless strength. Not even great generals were a match for it, much less brigadier generals like them. Want to run? Aren't you going to leave anything behind? Wang Chong inwardly sneered at this sight. Shamshak and Che Kuan Benba had dared to attack Chen Bin and ruin Wang Chong's chances. So how could they allow the 2 of them to so easily retreat? Bang! With a thought from Wang Chong, the stellar energy Vajra pestle in his hand shot like a shooting star toward Shamshak's back. Almost at the same time, the air rumbled, and another huge rock tumbled in the air with a sharp whistle, heavily crashing into Chekan Benba. At this moment, Wang Chong had controlled the giant ape to throw out a massive boulder. Boom! Boom! With miserable screams, Shamask and Chekan Benba were struck in the back at the same time. Vomiting blood, the 2 of them fled at top speed. Roar! The giant ape roared and leaped into the air in pursuit of the Uzun army and the Western Turks. This time, the giant ape was no longer bare-handed. A massive metal cudgel more than 10 meters long had appeared in its hand. The cudgel stirred the air around it, stirring up an astonishing aura. Go, go, go! Let's go! In the distance, the thousands of Mutri Great Cavalry and Celestial Wolf Cavalry had long ago been on guard against the giant ape. Throughout the entire transaction, although the giant ape had always been at the back and was a distance away, there was nothing more eye-catching than it. To these elite cavalry, the greatest threat was not Wang Chong or Gao Xianji, but this giant ape. Chapter 10:18. Boom! There was an earth-shattering crash as a giant metal cudgel slammed into the cavalry at the very back. Aya! A series of miserable screams rang out as several dozen Mutri Great Cavalry and Celestial Wolf Cavalry were unable to dodge in time and were struck by the giant cudgels hurled by the giant ape. The immense force of the cudgels instantly killed them on the spot. Now that the deal was complete and Chen Bin had been tossed over to Li Sai by Qing Qianli, there was no longer any need for the two sides to continue working together. How could Wang Chong let go of this opportunity? But right now, the one who was most anxious was not Wang Chong, but Gao Xianji. Dewisili, where do you think you're going? Leave behind the formation phenomena. Gao Xianji's speed was as fast as lightning, enough to strike fear into the hearts of any expert. The air rumbled as Gao Xianji left a long trail of white qi in his wake, as he chased after Dewisili at an unbelievable speed. Boom! The air split apart like a wave as a vast stream of sword qi, more than 10 zhang long, slashed at Dewisili in the air. Gao Xianji seemed to have decided that Dewisili was the one who would chase him relentlessly. Meanwhile, a sharp aura had already locked onto Dewisili, as if he would not rest until he took back the formation phenomena. Bastard! Dewisili was both shocked and enraged. In the past, he really would not have been afraid of fighting with Gao Xianji, but now, a single blow from the two of them would be enough to pulverize the letter in his hand. In a battle between experts, every second mattered. Under these circumstances, Dewisili did not even have the time to open the letter and memorize it. Dewisili also believed that Gao Xianji would never give him this chance. Huashu Wuzong, help me block Gao Xianji. After this is done, I will share the formation phenomena with you. Dewisili suddenly shouted as he tightly gripped the letter in his hand. Dewisili was still skeptical about the formation phenomena in the second half of the scroll, but now he was 80% convinced. If it wasn't true, Gao Xianji wouldn't have chased after him so relentlessly and acted as if he wanted to fight him to the death. This brat is really gullible. He doesn't even understand the principle that all is fair in war. The Central Plainsmen sure are honest. Dewisili thought mockingly in his heart. He was now certain that Wang Chong had most likely not discussed the deal with Gao Xianji and had forcibly made the decision. If that wasn't the case, he would never have had the opportunity to take advantage of it. On the other side, Huashu Wuzong had already fled a distance away. When he heard Dewisili's words, his eyes flashed, and he immediately changed his mind. Just as everyone was retreating into the distance, Huashu Wuzong bent his body and abruptly charged toward Gao Xianji. Boom! The golden Vairocana Buddha suddenly appeared in the void, and then a huge saber qi that could split mountains and split seas slashed toward Gao Xianji. Boom! The shocking saber qi and sword qi collided, and the peerless sword qi swept out in all directions, stirring up the air and soil within a radius of 150 feet, triggering a series of explosions. However, this simple collision immediately won Dewisili an important opportunity to catch his breath. Nay could only hear the warhorse neighing as Dewisili suddenly accelerated, leaving a series of afterimages in the void, and quickly disappeared into the distance. On the other side, the enraged Gao Xianji was invincible, and even Huashu Wuzong could not stop him. Swish! A heaven-shaking bolt of sword qi tore through the armor on Huashu Huizong's left arm, pulverizing it like a piece of paper. Even the arm beneath the armor had been cut open, blood spurting out. However, Huashu Wuzong only frowned, and there was no change in his expression, as if the arm that Gao Xianji had stabbed was someone else's arm. Go! After blocking Gao Xianji with his saber, Huashu Wuzong immediately shot into the distance without hesitation. Although Huashi Wuzong was not as strong as Gao Xianji, if he focused on escaping, not even Gao Xianji would be able to stop him. Lord Protector General, there's no need to worry about them. Come back. As the ashen-faced Gao Xianji was continuing his pursuit, a voice came from behind him. Wang Chong had come up from behind and called out to stop him. Dalawan Ruozhen had already left, and with him present in this transaction, Gao Xianji wouldn't be able to gain much of an advantage if he continued to pursue. Being able to kill a few Mutri Great Cavalry and Celestial Wolf Cavalry was already quite good. What a pity. I was just a little bit away from catching up, Gao Xianji spitefully said as he looked into the distance. Wang Chong was going to save them, and he was going to destroy the formation phenomena. The reason Gao Xianji hadn't stopped this transaction was because he had made up his mind to destroy the letter with the formation phenomena written on it the moment the transaction was completed. This way, he would be able to help Wang Chong save Chen Bin and also stop De Whistly's scheme. Alas, a single Huashi Wuzong had ruined everything. Haha, Lord Protector General, there's no need to worry. Let them go. To Gao Xianji's surprise, Wang Chong faintly smiled as he looked in the direction De Whistly's forces had gone. Gao Xianji's heart trembled at Wang Chong's words, and he immediately turned his head. The smile on Wang Chong's lips caused Gao Xianji's mind to jolt. Countless thoughts flitted through his mind, and he seemed to understand something. Haha, Lord Protector General, the transaction is complete. Let's go back and talk. As if already guessing at what Gao Xianji would ask, Wang Chong smiled and spoke first. Gao Xianji nodded, gathered his army, and together with the giant ape, they set off for the distant city of Talis. In the distance, dust churned. Finally free from the pursuit of the Tang dynasty, and no longer in sight of the city of Talis, De Whistly finally breathed a sigh of relief. Great General, congratulations. For a Tang dynasty soldier to be exchanged for a set of formation phenomena, there is no better deal than this. With this set of formation phenomena, the Western Turkic Khaganate has a chance of revitalizing itself, and the Great General will be able to reach an even higher status. Accompanied by the clattering of hooves, a voice suddenly came from behind. Dalawan Ruozhen, mounted on a highland steed, was catching up. As he gazed at De Whistly, Dalawan Ruozhen gave a meaningful smile. Thump. This voice caused De Whistly's heart to thump. Now that the enemy was gone, the people De Whistly least wanted to see were the Izan people. Prime Minister is too serious. I just want to use it to perfect my Celestial Wolf illusory formation. I don't have any grand ambitions. De Whistly pretended not to understand. Haha. Our Uzan's great Scarlet Sun formation also happens to have some flaws that require the use of formation phenomena to perfect. Why don't Great General let us take a look? Dalawan Ruozhen faintly smiled, but his eyes turned sharp. Before trading with the Tang dynasty, the two sides had agreed that the Tang dynasty's formation phenomena would be given to the Uzan. But De Whistly had gotten what he wanted, and yet he was feigning ignorance at a time like this. But Dalawan Ruozhen was no easy fool. Buzz. Dalawan Ruozhen's words immediately caused the mood to turn solemn. De Whistly said nothing, and as he sat on his black steed, his body clearly stiffened. Formation phenomena. Du Wuxia had exerted himself again and again, finally managing to get Wang Chong to agree. Although he had made a promise to Dalawan Ruozhen and Huashi Wuzong, he had only been forced by the circumstances. How could it be easy for De Whistly to hand it over now? What? Is Great General unwilling to give it up? Dalawan Ruozhen's sharp eyes seemed to be able to see into De Whistly's mind. Humph. With a cold snort, Huashi Wuzong and De Whistly next to Dalawan Ruozhen suddenly paled. Although the two of them did not say anything, they both placed their palms on the weapons at their waists. At that moment, their auras became extremely sharp. De Whistly, we also put in a lot of effort in this transaction. Are you thinking of burning the bridge after crossing the river and going back on your word? Dusong Mangpoch coldly said. The mood instantly tensed. Clang clang clang. All the Mutri Great Cavalry behind Dalawan Ruozhen and Huashi Wuzong unsheathed their sabers, their blades gleaming with cold light, as they aimed at De Whistly and the Western Turks. At almost the same moment, the Celestial Wolf Cavalry grimaced, and began to unsheath their swords, aiming them at the Mutri great cavalry. Just a moment ago, the two armies had been fighting side by side, but now, they were pointing their sabers at each other. Ha ha ha. As the mood reached a fever pitch, and seemed on the verge of a bloody clash, de Wussely suddenly laughed. Prime Minister and generals, what are you thinking? I, de Wussely, am not the sort of person to go back on my word. It's that crafty brat from the Tang dynasty, who actually wanted to use formation phenomena to drive a wedge between us. But how could we let him do as he wished? Dalawan Ruozan, these are the two pieces of paper from before. I've already read through them and memorized them. Take these two pieces of paper. Without the slightest hesitation, de Wussely took out the first two pieces of paper that Wang Chong had given him, and tossed them over without even glancing at them. Let alone Huashu Wuzong and Dusong Mangpoch. Even Dalawan Ruozan was a little surprised by this sudden action. Swish! Although he was alarmed, Dusong Mangpoch's arm twitched as he subconsciously caught the letter de Wussely had tossed over. As he opened the paper and glanced at its contents, Dusong Mangpoch couldn't help but widen his eyes. Although de Wussely had not allowed them to see the two pieces of paper, just from the artistic conception of the words on them, Dusong Mangpoch could tell that de Wussely had not been hiding anything. He really had given him the two original copies of formation phenomena. This scoundrel, even the illustrious and experienced Dusong Mangpoch, an imperial great general on par with de Wussely, found it somewhat difficult to understand what de Wussely was thinking. A moment ago, he had appeared extremely unwilling, but now he had become so straightforward. It was truly difficult to think of the two as the same person. Great general, very straightforward. We are all allies, so be at ease. Once we have read through these two pieces of paper, we will return them to Great General. As Dalawan Ruozan spoke, he lightly brushed his sleeve, his expression relaxed and carefree. As he spoke, Dalawan Ruozan made a slight gesture. A moment later, his saber was sheathed, and the clattering of metal rang out as the Mutri great cavalry sheathed their weapons. The extremely tense atmosphere was instantly dissolved at this moment. Haha, there's no need for that. Prime Minister can keep them. De Wussely laughed, his attitude completely different from before. Chapter 10:19. My lord, Uzun's men didn't do anything in this matter. From start to finish, it was my lord's sole effort. Isn't giving it to them too easy? Once Dalawan Ruozan and Huashu Wuzong had left, Shamshak couldn't help but say, "That's right. In the end, Uzun is still our enemy. Isn't giving them the formation phenomena just nurturing a tiger and inviting calamity?" Chekambemba agreed. On this matter, Chekambemba's attitude was strangely identical to Shamshak's. He truly couldn't understand why de Wussely would give the formation phenomena to Uzun's men. But both Chekambemba and Shamshak had developed the habit of absolute obedience to de Wussely. Thus, when Dalawan Ruozan was present, the two of them had said nothing. Now is not the time to fall out with Uzun. Moreover, Dalawan Ruozan isn't that easy to deal with. Didn't you see? If we can't get the formation phenomena, Huashu Wuzong and Dusong Mangpoch will immediately attack. De Wussely said. Shamshak and Chekambemba fell silent. Huashu Wuzong and Dusong Mangpoch were both extremely powerful great generals, and they also had the wise and resourceful Dalawan Ruozan. Now truly was not the time to fall out with Uzun. Moreover, Uzun had brought far more soldiers with him. If we have to give it to them sooner or later, we might as well give it to them straight away. De Wussely indifferently said. But Shamshak and Chekambemba wanted to say something, but de Wussely quickly interrupted them. No buts. Do the two of you really think I'm that stupid? Would he really hand over all the formation phenomena to them so easily? De Wussely said coldly. Shamshak and Chekambemba were stunned, but very quickly, the two of them thought of something and felt relieved. Although he did not know how de Wussely did it in such a short time, there was no doubt that de Wussely had done something to those letters. My lord is wise. At this moment, the two of them were completely convinced. De Wussely just smiled and looked in the direction where Dalawan Ruozan, Huashu Wuzong, and the others left. A profound light flashed in his eyes. You have your Zhongliang scheme, but I have my own ladder to climb over the wall. Although Daluan Ruozan had given the 3 sheets of formation phenomena to Daluan Ruozan, not even Daluan Ruozan had expected that Wang Chong had not touched a single word on the first 2 sheets. He had even given the 3rd sheet to the Tibetans without hiding anything. But in the instant that he handed it over, no one noticed that he had already tampered with it with his stellar energy, blurring a few key words on one of the volumes of formation phenomena at an extremely fast speed. Although only a few words had been changed, without these key words, the meaning of the entire formation phenomena was completely different. There was a reason why Dewissely had been so straightforward. Daluan Ruozan, I've already given you the things. If there's a problem, you can't come looking for me. Dewissely laughed darkly, and quickly led the army back to the camp. Although Dewissely had done all he could to plan, not even he could have imagined that the situation would develop in a completely different direction. Some li away. Prime Minister, with these formation phenomena, no matter what, we can at least give an explanation to the Tsimpo. After leaving the Western Turkic camp, Hueshu Wuzong solemnly handed the 3 letters containing the ultimate secrets of the formation phenomena to Daluan Ruozan. A weight lifted from his heart. Daluan Ruozan had left the royal capital's prison with tens of thousands of elite cavalry, and all the Mutri great cavalry, all without the Tsimpo's consent. In the War of the Southwest, Daluan Ruozan's defeat was already a criminal, and now that he was mobilizing his own soldiers, he was even more guilty. However, with the help of something as legendary as formation phenomena, everything would be different. Although both Hueshu Huaitsong and Dusong Mangpoj appeared extremely calm in front of Dewissely, as if they didn't care too much, this was only because they were imperial great generals who had concealed their cultivation very well. How could the 2 of them not understand the meaning and weight of true formation phenomena? This was something that could raise the strength of the entire Uzan Empire. To everyone's surprise, Daluan Ruozan, who had just a moment ago appeared to be very concerned about formation phenomena to Dewissely, didn't even look at the 2 volumes of formation phenomena before tossing them to his aide. It was like he was throwing away 2 pieces of insignificant paper. Don't get too optimistic. Hueshu, Dusong, the contents of these 2 volumes aren't as important as you imagine them to be. Daluan Ruozan had a relaxed expression, but his first words left the 2 great generals of the Uzan Empire dumbstruck. Both of them were dumbfounded. Prime Minister, are you saying that the formation phenomena that Wang Chong gave us is fake? Hueshu Wuzong asked in shock. It's fake to begin with, so how could it be real? Daluan Ruozan said decisively with a wave of his sleeve. But didn't we all see the mantra from before? Just 60 of the Celestial Wolf Cavalry were able to create the illusion of formation phenomena, even though they were just beginning to learn it. This was something that no formation could achieve. If it weren't for formation phenomena, it wouldn't have this kind of power. Dusong Mangpoj also spoke up. Although he had also wondered if these 3 sheets of paper could be fake, he couldn't have been as certain as Daluan Ruozan that the formation phenomena were fake without even looking at them. That's right. All of us saw it at the time. Hueshu Wuzong also agreed. Originally, Hueshu Wuzong had been rather happy to have obtained the 3 authentic sheets from Dewissely, but now, all his excitement had vanished. And if these are all fake, doesn't that mean that Dewissely also got a fake? Dewissely liked to play the pig to eat the tiger, but he was only playing the pig to eat the tiger. He wasn't truly clumsy. It was very difficult to believe that Wang Chong had managed to fool 3 great generals in such a short time. And from Dewissely's reaction, it was clear that he also believed it to be real. But Daluan Ruozan never lied. If he was certain that the formation phenomena were fake, then there was an 80 to 90% chance that it was as he said. Daluan Ruozan only smiled. Dewissely doesn't understand him, so it's normal for him to be fooled by his methods. But I understand him far too well. This isn't our first time fighting with him, and given his personality, he would never hand over something like formation phenomena to anyone. Dewissely is just being wishful thinking. But those phenomena, Dusong Mangpoj still found it somewhat difficult to believe that the contents of the 3 sheets of paper were all fake. That's where he's brilliant. If I'm not wrong, the simplified version of formation phenomena that he gave me at the beginning, including the first half of the formation phenomena, are all real. He's mixing half of it with half of it. What a good trick. Although Daluan Ruozan had been involved in this transaction, he had spent the majority of it as a bystander. In truth, he was also rather curious as to how Wang Chong had managed to fool Dewissely, but even Daluan Ruozan had to admire Wang Chong's daring. But if Prime Minister knew, why didn't he warn him? After all, we are still allies. Huashu Wazong slightly creased his brow. It's not that I didn't want to warn him, but that even if we did, it would have been useless. Daluan Ruozan shook his head. Dewissely wants the formation phenomena far too much. If we had warned him at that time, he would have thought that we had ulterior motives. Moreover, we have no evidence, so why would Dewissely believe us? Daluan Ruozan's words left Huashu Wazong and Dusong Mangpoj dumbfounded. These 2 top-class great generals of the Uzan Empire were speechless. In the end, the Uzan Empire and the Western Turks were only temporary allies, and their friendship was not that deep. How could Dewissely possibly give up on this transaction? Because of a few words from them. Let's go. We'll talk after we return to camp. With these words, Daluan Ruozan quickly led his men away. Wang Chong, why did you stop me from pursuing Dewissely? Meanwhile, in the distant main hall of Talas, Gao Xianji, Cheng Qianli, Wang Yan, Banahan, and all the other generals of the Tang dynasty had gathered together. Before he had even warmed his seat, Gao Xianji couldn't help but ask the question on his mind. That's right, Marquis, Dewissely is still our enemy. If he obtains the formation phenomena, he'll be even more difficult to deal with in the future. Shi Yuanqing, Banahan, and the other generals echoed his sentiments. No matter how one looked at it, Dewissely had obtained a complete victory in this transaction. More importantly, once the formation phenomena got out, it would create even more terrifying opponents. Haha, Lord Protector General, be at ease. This matter is far from simple. Even if Dewissely gets those 3 pieces of paper, he won't be able to obtain the formation phenomena. Wang Chong faintly smiled, a confident expression on his face. Wang Chong's words instantly silenced the noisy chatter in the hall. Like a stone falling to the ground, the people in the hall froze at Wang Chong's words, and then they relaxed. So you mean that what Dewissely obtained was fake? Gao Xianji said. His greatest worry in this transaction was that Wang Chong would really hand over the formation phenomena to Dewissely, allowing the Western Turkic Khaganate to grow even stronger. But from what Wang Chong had said, he was probably overthinking things. The 3 pieces of paper Wang Chong had given to Dewissely were probably fake. Haha, how could that be? With Daluan Ruozan present in this transaction, deceiving Dewissely is easy, but deceiving Daluan Ruozan is much more difficult. And besides, Dewissely isn't that easy to deceive. Wang Chong faintly smiled. He sat across from Gao Xianji, a long table between them. At the same time, he extended a finger and lightly tapped on the table. Chapter 1020. Wang Chong would never underestimate his opponents, much less a shrewd imperial great general like Dewissely or a strategist like Daluan Ruozan. If he had brought out a fake, Dewissely would have already killed Qin Bin. Gao Xianji, Cheng Qianli, and Shi Yuanqing were left confused by Wang Chong's words. They had no idea what Wang Chong was talking about. So Wang Chong, were those 3 pieces of paper real or fake? Gao Xianji went straight to the point with a frown. The letters were real, as was the content. It's just not what Dewissely wanted. Wang Chong faintly smiled, a profound look on his face. Other than Wang Chong, no one else could explain the inside story of this transaction. The highest realm of array formations was array phenomena. However, this ancient power was not as simple as people thought. In the history of the entire continent, there was a period of time when formation phenomena were actually very common. And it was not just the Central Plains. The Western Turks and the Uzun Plateau had all had their own unique formation phenomena, all of them at the pinnacle of their power. Once one reached the level of formation phenomena, one could use the power of the world to greatly increase the power of one's soldiers, allowing them to reach an inconceivable level of power and defeat their opponents. However, due to an unforeseen event, the highest level and ultimate power of these formations had completely disappeared from the entire continent. If not for this, the Celestial Wolf Great General would not have spent so much time and still ended up empty-handed. And he would not have been like he was now. The moment he discovered the secret of formation phenomena on Wang Chang's body, he could no longer restrain himself and began to think of a way to seize it. In the post-apocalyptic world, in order to deal with the foreign invaders, many people thought of this ultimate formation power. However, this ultimate formation power, from scratch until it finally saw the light of day, had expended countless manpower and resources, taken countless detours, and created many different versions of it. In the end, after gathering the power of the entire world, the best version of the true formation phenomena was finally selected from the countless versions. Don't worry, my lord. I've already arranged everything. Although the version that Dewissely had taken was real, I had made some minor changes to it. The more he cultivates and delves into it, the greater the harm it poses to him, and the greater the weakening of his power. Furthermore, it's not even close to the true realm of formation phenomena. This is also my punishment for using such despicable methods to kidnap Chen Bin. Wang Chong tapped his fingers on the table and said confidently. Wang Chong didn't explain much. Wang Chong, I believe you. Gao Xianji's eyes brightened, and he didn't ask any more questions. No matter what Wang Chong had done or how he had done it, as long as Dewissely couldn't obtain the true formation phenomena, he would be at ease. This was the only thing he was concerned about. Qianli Yuanqing, fortify the city's defenses to prevent Abu Muslim and Dalawan Ruozan from joining forces and making a comeback. In addition, let the soldiers rest. Yes, my lord. The pair respectfully replied. Congratulations to user for achieving preliminary victory in the Battle of Talas. You are rewarded with 8,000 points of destiny energy. As the meeting concluded and the group left, Wang Chong prepared to stand up. Suddenly, a familiar voice rang out in his mind. A golden light poured into his mind, and Wang Chong instantly sensed a subtle transformation in his body. His body seemed to have gotten stronger, his cells more energetic. At the same time, the light in his mind shifted. From the moment Abu Muslim had arrived at Talas to the moment Abu Muslim led the Arab army in retreat, countless sabers and swords had been flashing. Mountains of corpses and seas of blood had appeared before Wang Chong's eyes. One fierce battle after another taking place at an astonishing speed. The final scene in Wang Chong's mind was that of an enormous map of the continent slowly turning, until it finally stopped at the golden number 8,000. The first phase of the battle is over. The second phase is about to begin. Warning. User has an extremely high chance of defeat. Warning. User's situation will become even more complicated. His true opponents are not limited to the Arabs. If the mission fails, user will be obliterated. User must use every method possible to survive. The reward for the second phase is 20,000 points of destiny energy. If the mission fails, 80,000 points will be deducted. User has an extremely low chance of survival. Another warning. Before the Battle of Talas is won, user cannot retreat. Retreat means death. One mountain cannot hold two tigers. The two empires must decide the final victor. Almost at the same moment the rewards for the first phase of the mission were issued, a string of information flowed into Wang Chong's mind like a waterfall. Wang Chong's face froze in shock. Chen Bin had already been rescued, but the Stone of Destiny had only announced the victory of the first phase now. This was already rather strange. But what was even stranger was the string of information the Stone of Destiny had suddenly revealed. Has the battle still not been won? Wang Chong's mind was in turmoil. He had already taken control of the behemoths. More than half of the Skyquaking army had been killed, and more than half of the Arabs' elite forces had been killed. Abu Muslim and Ziyad had fled several dozen li, no longer as powerful as before. Wang Chong had originally believed that the battle had ended here, that the siege had been resolved, and that it could come to a close. But Wang Chong had never imagined that the Stone of Destiny would reveal that this was only the beginning of the war. It was far from over. His situation will become even more complicated. His true opponents are not limited to the Arabs. What does this mean? Could it be that the Arabs have other allies? But the strongest power to the west of the Tsong Mountains is the Arabian Empire. All the neighboring countries have been conquered by them. So how could they have any allies? Of all the information revealed by the Stone of Destiny, this was the most perplexing part. Wang Chong sensed that his involvement in the Battle of Talas had changed yet again, as if there was something important that he did not know. But what was it? As Wang Chong's mind was in turmoil, he quickly left the hall. Putting aside the matter of the Stone of Destiny, when the news of the victory in the Battle of Talas reached the rear, in the city of Suya closest to the Tsong Mountains, wonderful! The Arabs have retreated. The Tang people have defeated the Arabs. I just knew that the Tang dynasty would win. Protector General Gao. Protector General Gao. The originally chaotic Suya city was suddenly filled with jubilation. Countless merchants who heard the news came out to the streets. The bandits, highwaymen, and all sorts of other forces who had been looting and setting fires all over the place retreated one after another. The city slowly regained its order. The Tang dynasty had operated in the western regions for many years and still had some prestige. Now that the Tang dynasty had defeated the combined armies of the Arabs, the Western Turks, and the Uzan, it meant that the western regions would soon return to the rule of the Tang dynasty. Using this chance to make an enemy of the Tang dynasty was no longer a wise move. Damn it! The Arabs have hundreds of thousands of soldiers, far more than those bastards from Chishi and the Anchi Protectorate army, but they still lost. What the hell? What a bunch of useless trash. In the northwest corner of Suya, on the road leading out of the city, a one-eyed and bearded who rode a large horse, a strange saber 10 feet long in his hand, a hateful expression on his face. The Tang people had ruled the western regions for many years, and they had finally found a rare opportunity to plunder and plunder. They had never expected that in such a short time, the legendary governor of Iron and Blood of the Arabian Empire would be forced to retreat. Leader, what do we do now? The Arabs gave us money to make trouble in the rear for at least 3 months, and it's not time yet. A thin and quick-witted who bowed and whispered. This time, the Arabs had thrown out large sums of money to bribe the tribes in the rear and have them make trouble in the rear. Where else could they find such a good deal, where they could obtain both benefits and money? Thus, the tribes immediately agreed. There's nothing else to be done. Feng Chongqing is not an easy fellow to deal with. Celestial Wolf Great General de Wuxia sent people to kill him, but he still managed to escape. Moreover, he's gathered a group of people, so we shouldn't continue to be enemies with him. After all, Gao Xinji doesn't eat meat. Retreat. As for the Arabs, they only have themselves to blame. The one-eyed bearded man spitefully said, after taking one last look at the Anchi Protectorate headquarters and the banner fluttering in the air. The one-eyed man waved his hand and quickly led his group away, vanishing from Suya City. The Tang dynasty still had some power, so no matter how unwilling they were, they could only retreat. Wonderful! At this moment, countless buildings towered in the center of Suya, and in the very center of these buildings was a grand and majestic residence that exuded an ancient and distant aura. Anchi Protectorate. Several large golden characters had been painted on a black background on the entrance to the residence, signifying the place of supreme authority in the western regions. At this moment, Feng Chongqing was seated high above the hall. His fists were tightly clenched, his expression one of excitement. Young Marquis, I just knew that you could do it. At this moment, Feng Chongqing's eyes were bloodshot, and his expression was one of agitation. Ever since Wang Chong had led his army through Suya and over the Tsong Mountains toward Talas, he had been constantly paying attention to what was going on there. And now, after a long and torturous wait, Feng Chongqing had finally received the news he had been waiting for. Even though Abu Muslim and the Arabs had not completely retreated, But for Feng Chongqing, this stage of victory was the best news he had received so far. At the very least, the Anshi Protectorate army had gained the initiative. It was no longer trapped in the city, in a desperate situation where it could be completely wiped out at any moment. Wang Chong, thank you. Feng Chongqing's heart was filled with gratitude. Chapter 1021. Flap Flap. Several hours later, an eagle flew into Qixi. Marquis, Marquis, Marquis. All of Qixi was cheering, and the sea of people outside the Protectorate headquarters was filled with excitement. Wang Bei, Su Han's Han, and the others instantly relaxed. There had been no news of the Qixi army ever since they crossed the Tsong Mountains, but now, they could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Deliver the news to Lady Su. Su Han's Han, mounted on a Turkic warhorse taller than a man, quickly delivered the news. A horseman had already taken it and galloped into the residence. Within the Qixi Protectorate headquarters, maids nervously stood by the wooden door. Some of them were holding cups of tea, some were holding food, but all of them had worried looks on their faces. Some of them were even standing on their tiptoes, trying to see through the crack in the door, but they found nothing. Cough, cough, fierce coughing came from within the room, causing the maids outside to grow even more worried. What do we do? Young lady hasn't come out for an entire day, and the coughing sounds even worse than last night. If something happens to young lady, The moment the coughing began, one of the maids could no longer hold back her tears, her eyes brimming with heartache. However, she did not dare to speak too loudly, lest she disturb Sui Qin. Around them, although the other maids didn't say anything, the expressions on their faces had already revealed the worry in their hearts. In the room there was a dressing table, a couch, and nothing else. Sui Qin sat in front of the table, a mountain of documents piled up before her eyes. She was dressed in a thin white dress, and her face was pale and devoid of blood, but she was still focused on the documents before her. Inform the Zhang clan that the provisions sent to Talas must arrive as quickly as possible. The soldiers of the Central Plains have different habits from the people of the western regions. Although they can eat cattle and sheep, they can't do so for long without touching rice. What happened to those 200,000 warhorses? Did the Imperial Court's Imperial Horse Supervisor send someone to take them? Did the official reply arrive? In addition, pass on my order. Use the name of the Qixi Protectorate to continue recruiting craftsmen. On the other side of Talas, Senior Zhang Shouji had taken away a large number of craftsmen, and it was still unclear how many of them had died. But in the rear, Qixi could be attacked by Uzun and the Western Turks at any time. The small steel fortresses on both sides must be reinforced. I previously issued an order to recruit inscription masters. Arrange for elite soldiers to protect them in Wushang City of Steel. War did not only require craftsmen, but also inscriptionists. They would be needed in the future. Also, supervise the various aristocratic families to speed up the forging of weapons. Orders were passed down one after another, either orally or in writing. On the surface, Su Han's Han and Wang Bei were in charge of Qixi, but everyone was well aware that the true spiritual figure was this weak woman, sitting in the Qixi Protectorate. Although she was a woman, it was precisely because of Sui Qin's existence that Qixi could maintain its current order. She even had the strength to reinforce Feng Chongqing and Anshi. But with each order, Sui Qin's complexion grew paler and paler, her body beginning to show signs of sickness. Cough, cough. Halfway through the paperwork, Sui Qin could no longer hold back her trembling body and began to violently cough. Young lady, although the war is tense, your health is equally important. If this continues, not only will your body collapse, you won't even be able to attend to the preparations in the rear. Just listen to me. Eat something and rest a little. A voice suddenly rang out. Xiao Zhu was standing behind Su Qixin, massaging her back. She was so anxious that tears were streaming down her face. Little Zhu, I don't have time to rest. There are still 100,000 Tang Dynasty soldiers at Talas, and they are tied to the safety of all of Qixi and Longxi. I have to take care of everything and arrange for supplies and reinforcements. There's no need to worry. I know my own body. I can still hold on. Cough, cough, cough. As Su Qixin spoke, she unconsciously coughed again. This time, It was more serious than before. Reporting. At this moment, a messenger suddenly pushed open the door and rushed in. The moment he entered, he immediately kneeled on the ground. A letter from Talas. Marquis defeated Abu Muslim and the Arab army at Talas. What? Hearing this, the master and servant in the room trembled, their eyes bursting with joy. Hurry and let me see it. Su Yiqin's steps were unsteady as she hurriedly stood up from the table and walked over to the messenger. Taking the letter from the messenger, Su Yiqin read it over several times before finally confirming one thing. Talas won, they really won. Su Yiqin's face was flushed with excitement, her face flushed with blood, and her entire body seemed to recover. Her gaze left Qixi, crossed Longxi, and finally reached the most prosperous capital of the empire. Boom! The news of Talas's victory was like a boulder that sent ripples through the capital, stirring up waves in both the court and the public. Ha ha ha! Victory! Victory! The Tang dynasty has won! The Tang dynasty has won! The youngest son of the Wang clan has really led the Tang dynasty's army and defeated the armies of the Arabs, the Western Turks, and the Izan. I wasn't mistaken. The youngest son of the Wang clan is truly a pillar of the empire. The Tang dynasty is mighty. His divine majesty is mighty. Ha ha ha. The entire empire was in jubilation. When the news that the Izan and the Western Turks had mobilized their army reached the imperial court, the entire imperial court was in a tizzy. Countless gazes were focused on that strategic fortress on the Silk Road, to the west of the Tsong Mountains. 2 protector generals, 2 armies, a 4-way battle. This battle had shaken the hearts of countless people. From Qixi to Anxi to the Tsong Mountains, the Tang dynasty had deployed all its soldiers to the northwest, leaving them with no more soldiers to spare. If Talas was lost and Anxi and Qixi could not be held, then all of Longxi would be under the threat of the Arabs. A country below the Tsong Mountains had actually pushed its vanguard so close to Longxi. This was an unprecedented humiliation for the Tang dynasty. But what made the imperial court the most uneasy was the alliance between Arabia, Uzan, and the Western Turkic Khaganate. The strength of this alliance was enough to make anyone restless. But now the Tang dynasty had won. Although this was only a partial victory, it was enough to raise everyone's spirits. Wonderful! Wang Chong, this king truly did not misjudge you. In the King of Song's residence, after reading the report from Talas, the King of Song put down the letter in his hand, his eyes brimming with unconcealable pride. The King of Song had done many things in his life, including supporting the army, supporting the border generals with all his strength, helping the Tang dynasty expand, and carrying out the strategy of defending against enemies outside the borders. In his life, he had also promoted many people and resolved many dangers in the court. During the campaign against Goguryeo and the Eastern Turkic Khaganate in the northeast, he had actively made preparations and even forgot to eat and sleep. At the crucial moment, he had delivered life-saving provisions, saving the morale of the army and saving the war. But at this moment, the proudest thing that the King of Song had ever done in his life was uncovering Wang Chong and silently supporting him from behind. To live and die for the sake of the country, how can one avoid it because of misfortune or fortune? Wang Chong, you truly are the son of a general. The Tang dynasty is fortunate to have you. The country is fortunate, the people are fortunate. The King of Song looked at the 2 rolled-up couplets next to him, his heart filled with gratitude. To live and die for the sake of the country, how can one avoid it because of misfortune or fortune? This was a couplet that Wang Chong had hung in his study. When Wang Chong was not present, the King of Song had once visited the Wang clan and entered the study. Upon seeing this couplet, he had put it away in his residence as a treasure. Whether it was in the War of the Southwest or the Battle of Talas, Wang Chong had always lived up to his ideals and the words of this couplet. Wang Chong, go, spread your wings and soar into the skies for the Tang dynasty. As for your back, only I will support you. No matter how many people try to stop you, I will not let a single person stand in your way. The King of Song turned his head and looked through the open window. Lightning flashed and thunder rumbled, and dark clouds gathered, a sign that a storm was coming. But the king of Song's eyes were even brighter than the lightning. Putting aside the disturbances in Anxi, Qixi, and the Tang dynasty imperial court, with the conclusion of the first major battle, the distant Talas to the west of the Tsong Mountains welcomed a rare period of peace. Whether it was the Uzan, the Turks, or the Arabs, all of them had retreated several dozen li. Using this rare chance, the Tang dynasty army and the mercenaries of the western regions were mobilized, doing all they could to reinforce the fortifications. The terrain that had been destroyed by the giant beasts was dealt with one by one. The two steel defense lines were quickly repaired and changed according to the terrain. It was no longer a simple straight line. At the same time, Zhang Shouji and the other craftsmen were doing their utmost to upgrade the defenses of the city of Talas. At the same time, they were repairing the Tang dynasty ballistae and other weapons that had been damaged in the war. Everything went according to plan, with progress being made every day. Talas was calm on the surface, but the undercurrents of war were always surging. On the west side of Talas, around 60 to 70 li away, a lush forest stretched across the land. Towering trees soared into the heavens, each one as thick as two men hugging their arms around it. To the west of the Tsong Mountains, where the land was increasingly barren and the precipitation was decreasing, was this place the only place with so many ancient trees? The Black Forest. Chapter 1022. How is it? Is there any news from the Empire? A voice came out of the Black Forest. Abu Muslim was seated on the remains of an unknown statue on the official road that traversed through the Black Forest. The Silk Road was a road for merchants, and the Black Forest was a place where merchants often rested. Thus, many merchants had erected statues of various gods here to protect them. The vast majority of these statues were gods of wealth related to gold and silver. Every merchant would erect one here, and over time, it had become a part of the Black Forest scenery. There were even quite a few people who came here to admire these statues. But neither Abu Muslim nor Ziyad was in the mood to admire them. In the Battle of Talas, 100,000 Arab elites had died, the behemoth army had been completely wiped out, and the skyquaking army that the Empire had expended enormous resources to build had been dealt a heavy blow. Most importantly, even the Empire's favored subject, Mazel, had died there. The two of them felt their hearts sink. From Khorasan all the way to Samarkand, the Arab cavalry they had led had been unstoppable, destroying countless factions. But at Talas, the two of them had suffered an unprecedented defeat. I've already gotten in touch. Governor Qutayba of Tarsus and Governor Osman of Cairo have already responded. When they heard about what happened at Talas, they've already led their most elite forces over as quickly as possible. At most, they'll arrive in a month. They are extremely interested in the Tang dynasty faction that they have never interacted with in the East. Ziyad said. Governor Qutayba of Tarsus and Governor Osman of Cairo were two unfamiliar names to the kingdoms east of the Tsong Mountains. Few people knew of them, but in the Arabian Empire and the regions under their jurisdiction, their names were like a thunderclap that could stop a child from crying. In terms of status, the two of them were almost on the same level as the governor of Iron and Blood. Governor Qutayba of Tarsus was even known as the governor of war. Under his command, the Arab army had advanced by leaps and bounds, crossing the Mediterranean Sea and capturing Tarsus, all the way to the Black Sea. In terms of passion for war, Qutayba was probably even more fervent than Abu Muslim. Abu Muslim enjoyed conquest, conquering different empires and people, while Qutayba enjoyed war itself. Where there was war, there was Qutayba. Thus, even though he didn't have much interaction with Abu Muslim, when this dreadful governor of war heard of what had happened at Talas, he immediately responded to Abu Muslim's request for reinforcements and led his army over. As for Governor Osman of Cairo, although his status was lower than Abu Muslim's, he was still an illustrious and famous figure in the Arabian Empire. He was extremely experienced in battle, and he had always been very good friends with Abu Muslim. In the conquest of the ancient Khorasan dynasty, the two of them had fought side by side, leading an army to destroy this ancient and powerful foe. The two of them had an extremely deep friendship, In Abu Muslim's plan, Osman had always been one of his reinforcements. Once he conquered Talas and advanced into the western regions, Osman would come from the rear and join him in conquering the east. But now, after the disastrous defeat at Talas, Abu Muslim had been forced to change his plans and summon Osman ahead of time. Abu Muslim was clearly much more energized by Ziyad's words. Whether it was Qutayba or Osman, both of them had many elite soldiers under their command. With their reinforcements, Abu Muslim would be able to quickly make up for the losses he had suffered in battle. More importantly, both Qutayba and Osman were extremely powerful fighters. If the three governors worked together, they could completely destroy Talas and even complete the conquest of the east. Even so, Abu Muslim's thick brow was still slightly creased. What did Qutayba say? He's never done anything that doesn't benefit him. If he's willing to help, he must have some sort of request. Abu Muslim said. This, Ziyad hesitated, but when he saw Abu Muslim's stern gaze, he finally spoke. Qutayba requests that Lord Governor relinquish a portion of the war zone. And if we win the war, he hopes that Lord Governor will relinquish the Caliph's quota of Eastern weapons. In addition, he has the right to choose 10,000 elite soldiers from Lord's army to follow him as his private soldiers. Ziyad said. As he spoke, he had been stealthily observing Abu Muslim's complexion. As expected, Abu Muslim's complexion grew darker and uglier upon hearing Qutayba's request. Ziyad's voice also grew fainter and fainter. The east was an undeveloped war zone, filled with endless treasures and enemies. Ever since the empire had divided up the war zones, Qutayba had begun to covet the east. But the empire's strict hierarchy meant that no one could defy the caliph's orders. Moreover, Abu Muslim had always been domineering, his iron fist no less than Qutayba's, so Qutayba had never been able to interfere. But the crushing defeat at Talas had clearly given Qutayba an opportunity, and he had immediately revealed his claws and fangs. The Black Forest was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Ziyad didn't even need to raise his head to know that Abu Muslim's complexion was undoubtedly extremely gloomy. Everyone knew that the East was the exclusive domain of the governor of Iron and Blood Abu Muslim. Anyone who made such a request would be an insult to Abu Muslim, so there was no way he could agree to such a request. Okay. To Ziyad's surprise, just when he thought that Abu Muslim would refuse, he heard an unexpected answer. My lord. Ziyad's heart trembled as he jerked his head up in shock. My lord, you can't agree. If you agree to Qutayba's unreasonable request, my lord will become the laughingstock of the empire. Moreover, it will be extremely detrimental to my lord's prestige in the east. A moment later, Ziyad reacted and tried his best to dissuade him. Every governor of an empire was proud. If Abu Muslim agreed to Qutayba's request, he would forever be suppressed by Qutayba. Ziyad, you don't understand my meaning. Now is not the time to bicker over personal gains and losses. Both I and Qutayba have underestimated the severity of this eastern campaign. In Talas, we have encountered an enemy like never before. They are far more powerful than any opponent we have faced before. We have relied on the Behemoth army and the Skyquaking army to subdue many powerful foes, including the Khorasan dynasty, but they have all failed this time. From Khorasan to Samarkand, no empire has ever been able to stop us for so long, and no one has ever been able to defeat us. But these Tang people have done it. Abu Muslim sat on the remains of the statue, his expression completely different from before. His eyes were so sharp that they seemed to be able to see through all the secrets and details of this battle. My lord, Ziyad was struck dumb. He had never seen this side of Abu Muslim before. Let him come. Tell Qutayba that I will agree to all of his conditions, but there is only one condition. He must bring his best soldiers with him. Before Ziyad could say anything else, Abu Muslim decisively declared, Your subordinate understands. A complicated look flickered through Ziyad's eyes as he finally nodded. In addition, how is the recruitment of the militia going? Abu Muslim asked. In this war with the Tang dynasty, Arabia had suffered grievous losses, and Abu Muslim was currently severely lacking soldiers. He urgently needed to replenish them. Arabia was a country of war, and this warlike attitude had gradually spread to all the nearby conquered territories. Thus, the Arabian Empire had always had the best source of soldiers, and conscripting the militia was one of the most important methods. The Arabs were generally warlike and highly trained. As long as they were equipped with weapons, war horses and armor, and trained in formations, they would become an excellent source of soldiers. Through this method, Abu Muslim had been able to constantly gather soldiers. In the Battle of Talas, although he had been locked in a stalemate with Gao Xianji for more than 2 months and suffered massive losses, through this method, his soldiers had not only not decreased but increased. This was also an important reason why the Arabian Empire had been able to constantly expand and conquer so many empires and civilizations, becoming the strongest empire to the west of the Tsong Mountains. The casualties in this battle are far worse than we expected. From Khorasan to Samarkand, the militia has been severely depleted. More importantly, everyone is paying attention to the war with the Tang dynasty. The moment we lost at Talas, the news immediately spread, and many people are beginning to avoid the recruitment. We've been recruiting far fewer soldiers than before, and it will be very difficult to recruit many in such a short time, Ziyad sternly said. The side effects of the Battle of Talas were far more severe than they had imagined. It was not just a drop in soldiers and morale. Neither of them had imagined that they would even be unable to recruit any more soldiers. Abu Muslim said nothing, but his thick brows were deeply furrowed. However, your subordinate's greatest concern is not the militia and Qutayba, but Baghdad. Ziyad was deeply concerned, and did not say anything else. Arabia was an empire with a strict hierarchy. The death of Mazal was even more serious than Abu Muslim's miserable defeat at Talas. For a favored subject of the caliph to be killed right under the eyes of the governor of the East was a dereliction of duty on Abu Muslim's part, and a serious display of his incompetence. Based on the news from Baghdad, His Majesty was furious, and the death of Mazal had set off massive waves in Baghdad. Countless nobles, governors, and great generals were denouncing Abu Muslim. Although Mazal did not have a very good reputation in the capital, no one would jump out and make things difficult for His Majesty now that the emperor was furious. Although Mazal was unpopular, he still represented the caliph. Chapter 1023. There were already many nobles and ministers in the capital calling for Abu Muslim's death. This was not good news for Abu Muslim. No one knew what the caliph's order was, but the sword of Damocles would eventually fall. Ziyad, is there any way to find out about the high priest? Abu Muslim suddenly asked. My lord. Ziyad was stunned. He hadn't expected Abu Muslim to put aside the caliph's wrath and punishment, and instead talk about the high priest. Ziyad, Mazal is the high priest's disciple, and His Majesty favors Mazal because of his relationship with the high priest. Thus, from start to finish, the most crucial factor in this matter has always been the high priest's stance. The caliph has yet to make his stance clear, because the high priest has yet to make his stance clear. The behemoths being controlled by the Tang people, and switching sides at the crucial moment, is the greatest variable on this battlefield. Mazal's death is also heavily related to this. If we inform the high priest of this matter, perhaps he can help us survive this calamity, and even obtain some additional assistance. The Eastern world is filled with far too many unknown mysteries. Talas is probably only the beginning. I have a feeling that if we want to conquer the Eastern world in the future, we will need to borrow the high priest's strength. Abu Muslim's words left Ziyad flabbergasted. Everyone knew that Abu Muslim was facing a calamity after the disastrous defeat at Talas, but no one had connected these words to the most mysterious high priest of the empire. Moreover, the high priest was a lofty, mysterious, and revered existence that no ordinary person could interact with. But if one carefully thought about it, Abu Muslim's words were not without reason. For a moment, Ziyad's mind was in turmoil, and he couldn't help but freeze. But my lord, the high priest is like a dragon whose head and tail are rarely seen. The place he appears the most is the temple, but not even the people of the temple know of his whereabouts, much less us. Moreover, His Majesty the Caliph has long ago decreed that no one is allowed to disturb the temple or the high priest. Anyone who disobeys will be executed. And even the third prince is like this, much less us. Ziyad said. Abu Muslim immediately furrowed his brow. He knew what Ziyad was talking about. Back then, the third prince had been extremely favored by the caliph, but because of his playfulness, he had mistakenly entered the holy temple. When the caliph found out, he had been executed. The position of a prince was high and lofty, and he had the right to inherit the throne. Even the nobles, ministers, and governors of various regions had to bow and pay their respects to him, not to mention other people. From then on, the entire empire knew of the caliph's determination, and no one dared to approach the temple. Moreover, there were 10,000 Arab soldiers guarding the area. After a long period of thought, Abu Muslim was forced to admit that it was almost impossible to get past the high priest. If the holy temple was only heavily guarded, Abu Muslim could still take the risk and force his way in. However, the key point was that even if he forced his way in, it would be difficult for him to see the high priest. The high priest was too mysterious. In the past 10 years, he had only shown his face 3 times. It was almost impossible to get help from the high priest. Let's put this matter aside for now. Let me ask you, how is the Mamelukes doing? Abram mused said. But when he said those words, Abu Muslim's eyes clearly shone with a special light. My lord, the rebellion of the old nobles in Khorasan has been completely suppressed. From the information we have obtained, the Khorasan rebels have lost more than 300,000 soldiers. I believe that after this, they will find it very difficult to stir up any more trouble for a very long time. In addition, the Mamelukes have learned of what happened at Talas. Commander Ibak has already sent a letter saying that after finishing up the work at Khorasan, he will wait in the rear for Governor Qutayba and Governor Osman's armies to arrive at Talas with them. Ibak is very interested in the Eastern Army that was able to defeat the Behemoth Army and Skyquaking Army, Ziyad sternly said. Ziyad sternly said. When he mentioned the Mamelukes, Ziyad's voice clearly grew louder. In this battle of Talas, the Mamelukes were supposed to appear in the east, and the caliph had promised that they would assist Abu Muslim in conquering the eastern world. But because of the turmoil in the rear and the strange movements in Khorasan, the Mamelukes had been mobilized and had not arrived on the battlefield. The Mamelukes' absence was also an important factor in the defeat at the Battle of Talas. If they had received the reinforcements of the Mamelukes, perhaps everything would have been different. At the very least, the special Wuxia steel cavalry of the Tang dynasty would not have been able to gallop unhindered on the ground. However, although the Mamelukes are powerful, in terms of weapons and equipment, they can't compare to the Wuxia steel cavalry of the Tang dynasty. Those weapons are far too sharp. The god armor of the Skyquaking army is the finest equipment of the empire, the crystallization of all the craftsmen of the empire, and its toughness is rarely matched. But the Wuxia steel swords of the Tang people were actually able to cut through the god armor of the Skyquaking giants. I sense that these Wuxia steel swords are the Mamelukes' greatest weakness. If we don't resolve this weakness, the Mamelukes will find it very difficult to unleash their full power, Ziyad sternly said. Ziyad sternly said. Abu Muslim said nothing, but the change in his expression was enough to tell the truth. Although the battle had been intense, both Abu Muslim and Ziyad had been paying close attention to the situation on the battlefield. Although the Skyquaking army could not compare to the giant ape, it was definitely the second most powerful force in Arabia. In their plan, the power of the Skyquaking army combined with the god armor was completely capable of destroying the Tang dynasty's army from within. But when the 5,000 Wuxiang cavalry charged over, everything changed. If one had not seen it with their own eyes, they would have found it very difficult to believe that the god armor, which represented the highest level of craftsmanship in the empire, could be so vulnerable to the sabers and swords of the Tang people. Take the information we've gathered and the remains of the god armor, and send them to Khorasan in the rear, and hand them over to Mamluk leader Ibak. Ibak has more power and resources in the empire than we do, so he can only rely on himself to resolve this problem. I trust that once he sees these things he will understand. Flap flap. A black hunting falcon flapped its wings with astonishing speed, flying from the distant Samarkand all the way to the strategic fortress of Khorasan. The Arabs' advantage of being closer to Talis was now on full display. Abu Muslim's news had reached Ibak much faster than expected. Whoosh! As the black hunting falcon flew over Khorasan, one could see that this strategic fortress of the east was lined with rows upon rows of fortresses, like a forest of spears pointing into the sky. From the density and grandeur of these buildings, Khorasan was clearly an economically prosperous fortress. In truth, anyone who visited Khorasan would be stunned by its grandeur and grandeur. On the Silk Road, this city was known as the Pearl of the West Coast. Countless merchants would travel along the Silk Road from the east to the west, ultimately converging at the end of the Silk Road. But at this moment, all of Khorasan was no longer as beautiful as it had been in the past. The streets were covered in piles of corpses, burned in heaps, black smoke rising into the air. The air was thick with the stench of charred corpses, but the strongest of all was the suffocating stench of blood. In many places, even the air was red, and the blood was still spreading. Caw! Flocks of vultures and crows circled in the sky above the city, then swooped down, competing with the flames for the corpses. In many places, ownerless camels and ostriches wandered about. Khorasan, this pearl at the end of the Silk Road, had just experienced a gruesome massacre. Although the uprising had been suppressed, it would take a very long time to clean up the mess. Whoosh! In the center of Khorasan, a large banner had been raised atop a large white stone building. A black crescent moon was fluttering upon this banner, exuding an aura of extreme cruelty and somberness. Anyone who saw it would feel their heart palpitate in fear. Mamelukes. There was no one in the Arabian Empire who did not know of this banner and its name. Slaughter is eternal, conquest is king. This was the motto of the Mamelukes. At this moment, countless Mamelukes were standing around the white square stone building. These Mamelukes were all tall and muscular, their skin dark and their bulging muscles gleaming with a cold light, as if they were made of steel. Their bodies were tense and brimming with explosive strength, like cheetahs ready to fight at any moment. Most frightening of all was the black armor they wore. The marks of swords and sabers were so dense that one could tell that these Mamelukes had experienced countless bitter battles. The thick blood had even dyed their black armor a dark red, fusing with the thick killing intent exuded by the Mamelukes. These warriors who were born to kill were like demons from hell. They were not like warriors of the human world at all, and their callous and emotionless eyes were enough to make anyone who saw them feel as if they had been plunged into an icy cavern. Boom! A ferocious hound passed by the corner of the street, about 20 feet away from him. Suddenly, the hound seemed to sense something. Its body trembled, and it let out a low whimper. Tucking its tail between its legs, it began to flee in fright. These were the illustrious Mamelukes of the Arabian Empire. At the place where they appeared, even the bugs underground were silent, and the surroundings were deathly silent. Chapter 1024. The Mamelukes were not guards, and they would never stand guard for others. They were born to kill. The only person who could command the protection of so many Mamelukes was the highest commander of the army, Ibak. The Eastern world actually has an army like this. Putting down Abu Muslim's letter, Ibak slightly frowned. As an army born for war, the Mamelukes were sent to cruel military camps to be groomed from a young age. Hundreds of Mamluk youths would fight in these training camps, and only the last one standing would become a Mamluk. Through this cruel training and selection method, the Mamelukes had forged the reputation of being the strongest force in the Arabian Empire. In this world, there were very few opponents worthy of the Mamelukes fighting. Countless so-called elite and strongest armies had ultimately fallen at the feet of the Mamelukes. It was the deaths of countless powerful armies that gave the Mamelukes their invincible reputation. Ibak did not have much understanding of this army of the East, known as the Wuxian cavalry, nor had he heard of them before. But Ibak knew of the Skyquaking army. This was an army of giants that the empire had spent countless resources to nurture through the use of ancient techniques. Even Ibak had to admit that the Skyquaking army was extraordinary, and could not be compared to ordinary armies. And this army of the East had been able to cut through the god armor of the skyquaking army as easily as cutting through melons. This alone was enough for Ibak to treat them with a serious attitude. The Mamelukes had never feared formidable opponents, but the weapons that Abu Muslim had mentioned that could cut through the armor of the skyquaking army made him feel a deep apprehension. If what Abu Muslim had said was true, that these weapons could cut through the armor of the skyquaking army, then they could undoubtedly pose a threat to the Mamelukes as well. Based on what Abu Muslim says, only armor forged from meteoric metal can block this weapon, but meteoric metal is extremely rare. Where can I find enough to equip an entire army? Wang Chong asked. Ibak slightly frowned, a pensive look on his face. The Mamelukes had never lacked the courage to fight, but they were no fools. Even Ibak had to take the governor of Iron and Blood's word seriously. Ibak suddenly found this situation rather troublesome. Report. As he was thinking, a hurried voice interrupted Ibak's thoughts. Bastard! Didn't I tell you not to disturb me at this time? Have the remnants of Khorasan rebelled? Ibak harshly said. Khorasan revolted, leaving rivers of blood and mountains of corpses in the city. The Mamelukes had once more displayed their cruel methods of suppression. It would take a long time to bury 300,000 corpses, but Ibak had always pursued the principle of eliminating all evil. Now that he had discovered that the old nobles of Khorasan had revolted, he would pull out the radish and bring out the mud. Whether they were intentional or not, whether they were commoners or nobles, whether they were involved or not, as long as they had anything to do with the rebels, they would be exterminated, including their families and relatives. 300,000 deaths was only the beginning for Ibak. Thus, the people of Khorasan were in a state of panic, with people constantly coming to plead for mercy, hoping that the Mamelukes would stop here and not pursue the matter any further. There were even some Arab ministers and nobles among these people who were pleading for mercy. This was also why Ibak had ordered that no one was allowed to enter the city. My lord, it's not him. That person did not come for the remnants of Khorasan. He is very special. He told me to bring this to my lord. He said that my lord would understand once he saw it. The messenger's expression turned cold under Ibak's murderous gaze, and he did not dare to say anything else as he took out an item from his bosom. Bastard! Ibak was just about to curse when his eyes turned to the item in the messenger's hand. His pupils constricted as if he had been pricked by a needle. This was an ancient bronze token, its surface stained with blood. It gave off the feeling that it had experienced countless battles and had many stories to tell. But what truly attracted Ibak's attention was not this token, but the golden red sun symbol on the token. The token of the founder. Ibak's body trembled in shock. This bronze token was very similar to the token of the Mamelukes that Ibak wielded. The only difference was that Ibak's token had a black crescent moon symbol, while this bronze token had a golden red sun symbol. But even though they were different, any soldier of the Mamelukes would recognize this token. This was because this was the token of the founder of the Mamelukes, Qutuz, from several hundred years ago. It was the earliest token of the Mamelukes. In the Mamelukes and all of Arabia, Qutuz had enjoyed a resounding reputation. Even now, he was a role model for countless people, and was praised as a mighty hero of Arabia. His status was unshakable. There were many legends about why Qutuz had founded the Mamelukes, but among all these legends, there was one that was the most widely accepted and believed. It was said that Qutuz had originally been a mercenary of the Arabian Empire, but after his defeat in battle, he was thrown into prison and became a slave. Through a series of coincidences, he caught the attention of a certain person and was taken out of prison. This person gave him a new identity and a formation, the one used by the Mamelukes. It was rumored that Qutuz had been assisted by that person in establishing the first generation of the Mamelukes. Out of gratitude, Qutuz had forged a token. The golden red sun on the token was the agreement between Qutuz and that person, and this token became the token of the Mamelukes' first generation. But not long after this token appeared, it vanished. No one knew where it had gone. Ibak had not expected to see this token at a time like this. Where is that person? Ibak's expression flickered as he suddenly asked. In the courtyard in the back. The messenger lowered his head and sternly said. Ibak's curiosity was piqued, and he temporarily pushed the matter of Talas to the back of his mind as he hurried toward the rear courtyard. In the courtyard behind the White Fortress, Ibak saw the person the messenger had spoken of. This person was thin and extremely tall, and he was dressed in a black robe that draped down to the ground, giving him an extremely mysterious appearance. Behind him, there were huge carriages that were several times larger than ordinary carriages. The wheels of the carriages were as tall as a person, and they were all wrapped in black cloth from top to bottom. At a rough glance, there were 17 or 18 of these carriages, some of which were even parked outside the courtyard. Just who are you people? Why do you have the Mameluk's first-generation token? Ibak coldly said, a hint of wariness in his eyes. These people had appeared far too abruptly, and Kutuz's token had always been one of the greatest mysteries in history. Although Kutuz had left behind a decree stating that anyone with this token could command the entire Mamluk army and fulfill an agreement in his place, Ibak did not dare to relax his guard until he understood the identity and background of these people. Haha, my lord, there is no need to be nervous. It's fine if you are suspicious of us, but surely you don't even recognize this? The tall and thin man in black faintly smiled as he rolled up his sleeve, revealing a string of tadpole-like black divine characters on his wrist. These divine characters were like a bracelet that wrapped around his wrist, and in the very center was the image of a golden eye, the divine temple. Ibak's mind trembled and he lowered his head, his mind in great waves. In the entire empire, the divine hall had the supreme power, representing the gods in heaven and the caliph of the empire. They would not easily appear outside the imperial capital of Baghdad, nor would they easily contact outsiders. Ibak had never imagined that he would meet a priest of the divine temple in a place like Khorasan. So it was Venerable Priest. Ibak was rash. What orders does Venerable Priest have for coming here? Ibak respectfully said, Haha, it's not that I have any orders, but that the High Priest has ordered me to deliver a gift to Milord upon learning that Milord has encountered some difficulties. In addition, that Mameluk's first-generation token is also the High Priest's, not mine. The tall and thin man in black grinned. What? Ibak's body trembled, his eyes going wide as he raised his head. The High Priest was the owner of the Mameluk's first-generation token. Countless thoughts flew through Ibak's mind. He suddenly recalled Kutuz's last words. Could it be that the mysterious person who had helped Kutuz establish the Mamluk army was actually the High Priest? This was far too shocking. But even so, Ibak's mind was filled with an even deeper doubt. The High Priest was a lofty existence in the empire. No one could compare to him, and no one dared to offend him. Although Ibak was the commander of the Mamluk army, he was still insignificant compared to the High Priest. Ibak had never had the chance to meet the High Priest, and the two of them had never had any contact. Ibak truly did not understand why the High Priest would send someone at a time like this, and why he had even brought a gift. Venerable Priest, what sort of gift has the High Priest sent? Did the High Priest say anything else? Haha, Lord Ibak, there is no need to ask. You will understand once you see. As the tall and thin man in black spoke, he gestured towards the back. Hua, beside the carriage, a man with a sturdy figure and bulging muscles pulled forcefully, and the huge black cloth on the carriage was torn off. In a flash, countless soldiers looked over, and Ibak had an extremely focused expression on his face. This is... Even though Ibak had mentally prepared himself, he still couldn't help but tremble at the sight of what was on the carriage, his mouth wide open in shock. Under the blazing sun of Khorasan, Ibak was shocked to see that the carriage that had been stripped of its black cloth was carrying a mottled and bumpy metal ball that was more than 3 men tall. Chapter 1025. A Star from Outer Space. On the carriage at the very front was a massive and intact star from outer space. This was the first time Ibak had seen such a well-preserved star from outer space. The vast majority of stars from outer space would fiercely burn as they fell. By the time they hit the ground, all that was left of them were irregular pieces of debris, known as meteoric metal. For a star to maintain its original form, after falling to the ground, was simply a rare sight. Most importantly, any Arab craftsman would understand that a star from outer space, in such a perfect state, was the best material for forging. Such a piece of armor could definitely be used to forge a large number of meteoric metal armors. And the best kind. There were 17 or 18 carriages here. Could it be, at this moment even Ibak, famed for his cruel and merciless methods, couldn't help but gulp. This many stars from outer space was an extremely valuable gift to the Mamelukes. But how did the high priest know that I needed meteoric metal? A thought flashed through Ibak's mind as he recalled the words of the black-robed priest, and he suddenly felt an intense apprehension and respect. He had just received Abu Muslim's letter in the hall, but the high priest seemed to have foreseen it, and had delivered stars from outer space ahead of time. This was an unfathomable and awe-inspiring feat, but Ibak did not think any further. Anyone who recklessly speculated about the high priest's actions would not meet a good end. "My lord, these carriages." Ibak hurriedly raised his head to change his thoughts. "Ha ha ha, that's right. These 17 carriages are all stars from outer space, and the high priest has also specially gifted them to the Mamelukes. This is only the first batch. The second and third batches are already on the way, and it won't be long before they reach Khorasan. With these suits of armor, the Mamelukes will assuredly ascend to the next level and achieve even greater glory. In addition, the high priest has also sent a powerful formation that can assist the Mamelukes on the battlefield." The tall and thin man in black said as he gestured behind him. Very soon, the black cloths on the 17 carriages were all torn off. Sure enough, the black cloths were all covered with spherical, black stars from beyond the heavens. Unbelievable. Although Ibak had already guessed this, the sight of the 17 stars on the 17 carriages still left him stunned. The probability of meteorites falling was extremely low. It was already good enough to find one, let alone 17. Furthermore, out of the 1,000 pieces of wreckage left behind by the fall of 1,000 stars, it would already be quite good if one piece was a complete sphere. However, there were 17 of them. Such a phenomenon was beyond common sense. Other than the high priest, no one else could have done it. "What request does the high priest have?" Ibak asked. One would not visit a temple for no reason, and he had never met the high priest before. Not only had the high priest given him a cosmic star and a formation, Ibak did not believe that the high priest would not have any conditions. "Haha, my lord is wise." As expected, the tall and thin priest chuckled. "Lord Ibak can take all of these things, but the high priest has a request, and this request does not conflict with my lord's objective. A young commander has appeared at Talas, and is the high priest's target. He hopes that Lord Ibak can take his head and deliver it to the divine temple." Ibak was at first dazed, then enlightened and finally relieved. "Please tell the high priest that Ibak swears to the death to fulfill the high priest's wish." The crushing defeat at Talas had been like a boulder crashing into the Arabian Empire, sending waves through the empire. With the high priest's intervention, the entire war began to take a confusing turn. But one thing was certain. The first defeat had not only failed to break the will of this warring kingdom, it had only stimulated this massive empire to the west of the Tsong Mountains. Countless soldiers gathered at Khorasan, then charged into Samarkand and the Black Forest. The air was thick with the scent of war. At the same time, to the east of Talas, 60-some li away, the atmosphere was much more peaceful. The first battle was over. Whether it was the Tang dynasty, Arabia, Uzan, or the Western Turks, all four sides had suffered grievous losses and needed some breathing room to recover from the wounds of war. While the Tang dynasty was strengthening its defenses, Daluan Ruozan and the Dawusali were also welcoming their own era of peace. Walala, an Arabian hunting falcon flew down from the sky and into Daluan Ruozan's tent. What did Abu Muslim say? Daluan Ruozan was seated in front of a low square table, his head not even raised as he examined the map of the continent. "This is the 17th time Abu Muslim has written to me." On the other side, Huashu Huaitsong had a long saber at his waist. He had taken the letter from the hunting falcon, glanced at it, and then closed it. This letter is the same as last time. He hopes that we can hold the east and cut off Wang Chang's retreat. It seems that Abu Muslim still has a lot of distrust for us. Haha, we watched from the sidelines in the last battle, so Abu Muslim naturally has an opinion of us. It's already very gracious of him not to curse us in his letter. Daluan Ruozan faintly smiled unconcerned. He lowered his head and continued to study the map of the continent. But this can't be blamed on us. Before the third wave, Abu Muslim didn't even send out his own soldiers, so how could we? Moreover, we did our best the day before and suffered even more casualties than they did. As for later on the Arabs won, who could have imagined that they would be reversed so quickly? At the time, the Tang dynasty had 4 behemoths, and if we charged forward, we would only be throwing our lives away. How can we be blamed for this? Huishi Wuzong said. There had been far too many accidents in this battle. Whether it was Huishu Huaizong or Daluan Ruozan, neither of them wanted to see this development. Daluan Ruozan couldn't help but give a deep sigh at Huishu Wuzong's words. In truth, Abu Muslim's words aren't wrong. I truly did miscalculate this time. That person's division of the battlefield was still effective in the end. All of this was an accident for us, but it was inevitable for that person. Daluan Ruozan said. If not for Wang Chang's 2 steel defense lines, the Izan army and the Western Turkic army would have long ago joined up with the Arabs and surrounded the Tang people. There would have been no situation like in the last battle, where one side had attacked and the other side had remained uninvolved. Wang Chang's division of the battlefield had not been effective at the time, but no one could ignore its effects. Send a letter to Abu Muslim. Be more polite in your wording. Tell him that no matter what, our Uzan and the Western Turks will defend the eastern defense line to the death, and not let the Tang people leave. This okay? Huishu Wuzong hesitated for a moment before finally nodding. That's right, how is Dewussili doing? Daluan Ruozan suddenly thought of something and asked. With these words, the mood in the tent instantly relaxed, and a rare smile appeared on Huishu Huaizong's lips. Dewussili has already become completely infatuated with formation phenomena. Ever since that day, he began to cultivate with all his might, hoping to bring the celestial wolf illusory formation to its highest level. Huishu Wuzong faintly smiled. Although he had still not found any flaws in the formation phenomena technique, he had traded with Wang Chong. All the top-class commanders on the Uzan side knew that it was a fake. Thus, even if they obtained it, no one would examine it, much less cultivate it. Everything was calm and peaceful, but the Western Turks, their ally, were different. A mere 20 li away, the Western Turkic camp was abuzz with activity, countless soldiers loudly shouting and sweating as they galloped back and forth. This was a completely different world from the Uzan. Once he realizes that something's wrong, Dewussili will stop. Daluan Ruozan gently chuckled. I really can't understand it. Dewussili is a renowned general of the world, one of the strongest great generals. How could he not notice such a simple trick? Huishu Wuzong shook his head. There was not a single great general in the world who did not possess a vast breadth of vision and experience. Considering that Dewussili was one of the most outstanding of them all, it was even more incomprehensible. Men can make mistakes and horses can stumble. Even if Dewussili is an imperial great general, it's not as if he has never made a mistake. In the end, he's still an ally. Send someone to give him a reminder. In addition, send someone to observe the Western Turks and see what they're up to. Daluan Ruozan chuckled. To tell the truth, Daluan Ruozan was rather curious as to what they had managed to do with a fake formation phenomena technique that they were still enjoying and showing no signs of stopping. Yes, I'll take care of this matter. Huishu Wuzong gave a knowing smile and quickly left the tent. Gallop. A few moments later, a horseman galloped out of the Uzan camp, following the official road to the east. Around 20 li later, after crossing a hill, he arrived at the Western Turkic camp. Boom! Before he had even gotten close, he could hear a peal of thunder in the distance. Puzzled, the cavalryman subconsciously raised his head to take a look, only to see that the sky was clear and boundless. There didn't seem to be any lightning. What's going on here? The horseman's heart trembled as he subconsciously pulled on the reins and slowed down, his mind filled with confusion. Did I hear wrong? As this thought flitted through his mind, the Uzun horseman came back to his senses and galloped toward the hill. Chapter 10:26. Before he could clearly see the situation in front of him, he heard an earth-shattering roar. That voice was like a landslide or tsunami, as if thousands of people were roaring together with all their might. The cavalryman's heart skipped a beat as he subconsciously raised his head and looked over. The land several dozen li in front of him was flat, and on this land, tens of thousands of Western Turkic cavalry had formed a long vortex of steel, charging back and forth. As they yelled, they changed their formation, all of them merging into the mass. Around them, countless wolves surrounded them, howling and running. When all the men and wolves ran together, a huge aura burst out from their bodies like a tide, rushing straight into the sky. This powerful energy was so tangible that it was like a giant hand gripping the air, twisting and blurring it. From the high hills, it was impossible to see what was going on the other side. How could this be? The horseman's mind was stunned by this sight. Not long ago, when he had come here to take a look, there had been nothing like this. Tens of thousands of Western Turks were galloping across the land, their backs drenched in sweat, all of them acting like idiots. And on this scouting mission, he had never been told that he would see such a sight. Just what happened? How could they have gotten so strong in such a short time? The horseman's eyes were filled with disbelief. Everyone on both sides of the Uzun and the Western Turks knew about the formation phenomena. After all, thousands of Celestial Wolf cavalry and Mutri Great Cavalry had been watching the transaction. Although the Western Turks were excited, the Uzun camp had a completely different reaction. Privately, many of them speculated that the formation phenomena were most likely fake. The reason was simple. The Prime Minister's camp was far too calm. Although Uzun had also obtained the formation phenomena, the Prime Minister had made no attempt to publicize it, much less cultivate it. If it was real, this was simply impossible. But this was only the beginning. Looking up through the distorted space above the Western Turkic army, the horsemen saw an even more astonishing sight than they had ever seen. Above the Western Turkic cavalry, more than 1,000 meters above the ground, endless clouds were gathering from all directions. These thick clouds surged like pythons, blocking out the sunlight and casting a thick shadow over the ground. Not only that, but the horseman looked up and saw flashes of lightning in the depths of the clouds. These bolts of lightning were like silver snakes shuttling and exploding. The explosion he heard earlier was caused by these lightning bolts. These bolts of lightning were constantly changing, and they seemed to be resonating with the Turkic cavalry moving down below formation. Formation phenomena. The cavalryman's mouth was agape. He was completely dumbfounded, as if he had been struck by lightning. He had once inadvertently overheard one of his officers say that the Western Turks were too greedy and did not even know if something was real or fake. If they immediately began to cultivate it, it was very likely that they would be harmed. But the aura of the Western Turks had clearly thickened, and there were also the formation phenomena in the sky. What was going on? What he had heard and what he had seen were completely different. There's a problem. Either there was a problem with the great minister's judgment, or the formation phenomena were real. Either way, I have to report this to Prime Minister as quickly as possible. With no time to think, the horseman urged his horse around and galloped back in the direction he had come from. What? The Western Turks are cultivating formation phenomena, and their strength has rapidly increased? They're even stronger than before? In the rear, the top-class great generals of the Uzun, including Dalwan Ruozan, were all dumbfounded by the news from their scouts. Report to Prime Minister. This matter is absolutely true. The scout sent to us is one of the most elite scouts in the army. He has participated in hundreds of battles, large and small, including the war between King of Generals Hui Tadra Konglo and the Tang Dynasty's Wang Zhongxi. This matter can't be wrong. One of the leaders of the Uzun vanguard solemnly said. He had immediately sensed that there was a problem with the scout's report, and before consulting Dalwan Ruozan, He had cautiously dispatched several of his most experienced scouts. But all of them had reported the same thing. Within the tent, Daluan Ruozan, Dusong Mangpoj, and Huashu Wuzong exchanged speechless glances. Prime Minister, that's impossible. Is that brat really that stupid? He actually gave the real thing to Dawusili. Huashu Wuzong said, his brows tightly furrowed. Daluan Ruozan said nothing, a pensive look on his face. In truth, this matter isn't impossible. The people of the Central Plains have always been particular about honesty, and they don't care about the occasion. There are even times when they make grave mistakes because of this inflexibility. That Wang Chong might be an astonishing strategist, but he's still too young. For the sake of his so-called honesty, he might have handed over the real formation phenomena. In addition, didn't Gao Xinji try to destroy it? Perhaps not even they could have imagined that we would be the ones to snatch the formation phenomena. On the side, Dusong Mangpoj thought for a few moments before suggesting another possibility. He had been commanding the army outside and reinforcing the defenses, but when he heard the news, he had rushed over. It was clear that no matter what the truth was, this matter was very different from Daluan Ruozan's initial estimates. Impossible, Daluan Ruozan muttered to himself, his brow creased even deeper than the other two. All of you are underestimating that person too much. Although he's young, younger than all of us, his intelligence, schemes, and craftiness far surpass ours. He shouldn't have made such a low-level mistake. But with the Western Turks, the formation phenomena Dawusili obtained truly did have an effect. Facts can't lie. If it were fake, it would never have had such an effect. Dusong Mangpoj said. Daluan Ruozan instantly fell silent. Other than his defeat to Wang Chong in the War of the Southwest, Daluan Ruozan rarely had any doubts. But in this matter, Daluan Ruozan was forced to admit that there was a problem with his judgment. Let's go and take a look. On the outermost perimeter of the Western Turkic camp, Daluan Ruozan, Huashu Wuzong, Dusong Mangpoj, Huaba Senji, and a few other Uzan commanders had gathered together and were looking into the distance. The twisting space beneath the clear skies and the roiling thunderclouds that had appeared out of nowhere left all of them speechless. Even Daluan Ruozan was somewhat unsure of what to do. Prime Minister. Huaba Senji's name instantly focused everyone's eyes on Daluan Ruozan. Although no one said anything, their meaning was clear. The facts were right before their eyes. Dawusili had obtained those letters from Wang Chong, had truly cultivated the formation phenomena, and had even strengthened the Celestial Wolf Cavalry. If all of this was fake, then nothing in the world was real. At this time, even Huashu Wuzong, who had always followed Daluan Ruozan and had absolute faith in his decisions, was speechless. But in the end, Huashu Wuzong still decided to say a few words on Daluan Ruozan's behalf. This matter needs to be considered at length. I believe that the great minister's judgment will not be wrong. Huashu Wuzong said. Huashu, there's no need to explain for me. Daluan Ruozan bitterly smiled. The facts are right before our eyes. Dawusili truly has benefited from this. It's no wonder that the Western Turks are doing their utmost to train day and night. Perhaps we were wrong about Dawusili from the start. He did not do this without reason. Then, Prime Minister, do we also need to train? Huaba Senji asked, clearly tempted. The letters recording the formation phenomena were in Daluan Ruozan's hands. If they were fake, Huaba Senji wouldn't have even glanced at them. But the Western Turks had the Celestial Wolf Cavalry, and Uzan had the Mutri Great Cavalry. If the Celestial Wolf Cavalry could get much stronger by cultivating the formation phenomena, the Mutri Great Cavalry would definitely be able to do the same. As the highest-ranking commander of the Mutri Great Cavalry, Huaba Senji could not possibly not think about this. Dusong Mangpoj and Huashu Wuzong both frowned, but they said nothing and turned to Daluan Ruozan. Wait a little longer. Let me think about it some more, Daluan Ruozan said. Daluan Ruozan rarely found himself in a difficult situation, but this time, he was forced to admit that he was truly finding it rather difficult to make a decision. While Daluan Ruozan was observing from the distant hills, no one noticed that a Western Turkic scout had turned his gaze away from Daluan Ruozan's group and galloped toward Dawusili's position. Great General, I've discovered Uzin's men in the distance. Should we take action? The scout respectfully said, one knee on the ground. Haha, Daluan Ruozin? Dewussili faintly smiled and glanced in the direction of the hills. But he quickly looked away and nonchalantly shook his head. Let them be. In any case, they won't be able to see anything. How could Dewussili not know what Daluan Ruozin was thinking? Daluan Ruozin was still thinking too simply. When it came to formation phenomena, Dewussili was actually much more cautious than Daluan Ruozin. All was fair in war. How could he believe 3 sheets of paper that Wang Chong had casually tossed out? How could this be? If Wang Chong had given him the real first half, but tampered with the second half, wouldn't Dewussili have fallen for his trick? Given Dewussili's status and reputation as the Celestial Wolf Great General, he would probably become a laughingstock if such a thing were to get out. Thus, the moment he had obtained the formation phenomena, he had selected a portion of his soldiers and had them train according to the contents of the first and second scrolls. If it was fake and had no effect or side effects, Dewussili could just stop. At most he would lose a few hundred soldiers. But if it was real, everything would be different. No matter what, Dewussili did not believe that something that Anshi war god Gao Xianji had fought so hard for could be as simple as a fake character. Daluan Ruozin, you're still too cautious. Dewussili faintly smiled, a sharp light in his eyes. Chapter 1027. How are Shamshak and Chekimbenba? Have all the soldiers been checked? Have they found anything strange? I want to know every detail. If they feel the slightest discomfort, report it to me immediately. Dewussili quickly put the matter of Daluan Ruozin to the back of his mind. He stared at the leader of his guards, his eyes stern and cautious. Reporting to Great General, we've carefully checked 5 or 6 times, and every soldier has been checked. Everyone, including Shamshak and Chekimbenba, has found that everything is normal. The formation phenomena have a strengthening effect on everyone, and everyone's cultivation has become firmer and more solid. Moreover, there have been no side effects. The leader of Dewussili's guards respectfully reported. The Western Turkic camp appeared to be bustling with activity on the surface, but it was actually very careful on the inside. The witch doctors, the elite experts, and even the Celestial Wolf Great General Dewussili were constantly monitoring the state of the army. The slightest disturbance would be immediately reported to Dewussili, but reality showed that they had been too cautious. There had been no problem with the contents of the 3 books on formation phenomena. Very good. Dewussili gave a long sigh of relief, a gratified smile on his lips. All his efforts had finally paid off. The formation phenomena that he had pursued for more than half his life had finally come to fruition. Starting from this moment, the entire Celestial Wolf cavalry, and even the future Western Turkic Khaganate, would be completely different. Now it's finally my turn to cultivate. Faintly smiling, Dewussili quickly turned and returned to his tent. Gallop. As Dewussili was returning to his tent, no one noticed that in another part of the Turkic camp, far away from Daluan Ruozin, a fully armored Tang dynasty horseman, riding a Turkic horse, gave the distant Western Turkic army a deep glance, then turned around and galloped off into the distance. I have to report this to Marquis as soon as possible. In the blink of an eye, the cavalry disappeared without a trace. The towering walls of Talas had been repaired and reinforced by Zhang Shoji and his 7,000 or 8,000 craftsmen. All traces of battle had been erased. The entire castle merged with the 100,000 Rakshasa earthen stronghold formation underground, becoming more and more majestic, magnificent, and difficult to break through. In this aspect, Huang Batian and the earth element ability users of Wushang village played an important role. The group of people used their powerful earth-type abilities to guide the surrounding energy of the earth into the formation. This allowed the 100,000 Rakshasa earthen stronghold formation to receive a large amount of energy, making it even stronger than before. Outside Talas, after days of constant reinforcement, the 2 steel defense lines had been re-established. In addition, having learned from the previous lesson, Zhang Shoji had added many sharp spikes to the steel walls, making them even more difficult to break through. At the same time, Zhang Shouji had the craftsman pour a large amount of molten iron into the base of the steel walls. When the molten iron hardened into steel, it made the base even heavier and more difficult to move. The tens of thousands of Tang Dynasty soldiers trained day and night between the two steel defense lines, ready to fight at any moment. But at this moment, Wang Chong was not within the steel walls. Far away in another direction, Wang Chong was squatting on a massive boulder motionless. It seems like this is the end, Wang Chong muttered to himself as he looked forward. Whoosh! The wilderness was quiet, and there were only bursts of heavy and muddy breathing that sounded like thunder. Across from Wang Chong, a massive creature lay motionless on the ground. If one had not seen it with their own eyes, they would have found it very difficult to believe that this was that savage and domineering giant ape of boundless strength. The giant ape's eyelids were drooping, and its scarlet eyes were devoid of their previous savagery and cruelty. Instead, they seemed to be a little listless. That mountainous body also seemed to have lost all of its strength. It crawled on the ground, faintly revealing a trace of fatigue. More importantly, the giant ape's majestic life force had become much dimmer. It was like a candle in the wind, about to be extinguished at any time. It had been 4 or 5 days since the conclusion of the battle, but the giant ape was still alive. This was much longer than Wang Chong had expected. The giant ape was a massive deterrent to all the factions in Talis. As long as the giant ape lived, the Tang dynasty would have one more day to prepare. And one more day that the Uzan, the Western Turks, and the Arabs would not dare to act recklessly. In order to prolong the giant ape's life, Wang Chong had used every method he could think of. This included bringing the giant ape into the wilderness, far away from the city of Talis. At the same time, he retracted his psychic energy and allowed the giant ape to regain control of its mind. In this way, the giant ape would not be harmed, nor would it instinctively harm the Tang dynasty army in Talis. But even so, the giant ape's brain had begun to degenerate and wither. At the start, the giant ape had gained control of its own mind and would beat its chest and roar at the heavens. But now, even though Wang Chong had retracted his psychic energy, the giant ape remained very quiet, motionless on the ground. It had lost all of its former vigor. Wang Chong knew that the giant ape was about to die. Whoosh! The giant ape panted, its scarlet eyes staring at Wang Chong, seemingly tinged with a special emotion. Wang Chong couldn't help but feel a little stirred in his heart. Although the giant ape was just a beast with no human intelligence, after fighting side by side with it for so long, how could Wang Chong not feel anything for it? Time slowly passed, and after some time, the motionless giant ape looked at Wang Chong. Suddenly, it gave one final whimper and then fell silent. Wang Chong sighed and stepped forward. Extending his right hand, he slowly closed the behemoth's eyelids. Goodbye. A gloomy light flashed through Wang Chong's eyes. The giant ape was truly dead this time. The wilderness was quiet. Other than the rock eagles circling in the air, there was no other sound. Wang Chong didn't even need to turn his head to know that several tens of thousands of zhang away, several pairs of eyes were silently watching him. These were the scouts of the Arabs, Uzan, and Western Turks. Ever since the end of the war, the three sides had been sending out scouts day and night to investigate the giant ape's movements and wait for news of its death. Wang Chong was well aware that as long as the giant ape remained motionless, the three sides would not be able to discover it. This would at least buy the Tang dynasty a little more time. Gallop, gallop! As he was thinking, the rock eagles suddenly cried out in the sky. In the distance, 3 horsemen suddenly turned around and galloped back in the direction they had come from. Wang Chong immediately sensed something and turned his head in the direction of the city of Talis. In that direction, he saw a group of cavalry from the Qixi Protectorate galloping over. As they galloped, they divided into 4 groups, 3 of which pursued the Western Turks, the Uzan, and the Arab scouts while the rest galloped in his direction. General Chung, what's wrong? Did something happen with the Western Turks? Wang Chong faintly smiled as he looked at Cheng Qianli, Shi Yuanqing, and the Qixi Protectorate soldiers galloping toward him. How did you know? Cheng Qianli was stunned. He hadn't expected Wang Chong to guess before he had even said anything. It's not that hard to guess. Abu Muslim has just suffered a major defeat, so he definitely won't let the matter rest. He'll definitely continue to mobilize his army in the rear. But after suffering such heavy losses, no matter how formidable the Arabs are, they won't be able to do much in 4 or 5 days. As for Daluan Ruozan, even the Mutri great cavalry guarding the royal capital have been mobilized. The Uzan Empire probably doesn't have many soldiers left. The only one left is the Western Turks. My lord, speak. What's going on with Dawissili? Wang Chong faintly smiled. A complicated matter suddenly became incomparably simple in his tireless narration. The scouts reported that after obtaining the formation phenomena, Dawissili began to train day and night. Most importantly, according to the contents of your letter, they actually managed to cultivate formation phenomena, and compared to before, the cultivation of all the soldiers has improved significantly. After a few moments of silence, Cheng Qianli quickly explained the reason for his visit. Wang Chong was the sole person in charge of the transaction with Dawissili. Neither Cheng Qianli nor Gao Xianji knew much about the details. Cheng Qianli had no doubts about Wang Chong's abilities, but the reports from his scouts over the last few days had left him rather uneasy. Wang Chong, are you sure that the contents of the letter are correct? In the end, Cheng Qianli couldn't help but ask. The Tang dynasty was currently at war with the Western Turks. Although Dawissili and Daluan Ruozan had retreated, they had not truly retreated. Instead, they were blocking the road back to the east. Their intentions were clear and obvious. The fact that the Western Turks had gotten stronger after cultivating the fake formation phenomena given to them by Wang Chong was not a good sign. Is that so? The Western Turks have gotten stronger so quickly? To Cheng Qianli's surprise, Wang Chong's eyes brightened at Cheng Qianli's words, as if he had heard some good news. Cheng Qianli had wanted to ask a few more questions, but Wang Chong's reaction left him dumbfounded. Haha, Lord Cheng, be at ease. It's not that easy for Dawissili to cultivate the true formation phenomena. In truth, even if he wanted to extract some of the secrets of formation phenomena, it would be impossible. This is because this path simply does not lead to the true formation phenomena. Wang Chong faintly smiled, his expression calm and composed. He exuded a strength that could make others submit to him. For a moment, Cheng Qianli was dumbfounded. He had originally believed that he had made a major mistake, which was why he had come in such a rush. Cheng Qianli was a knowledgeable and experienced top-class general, and he was not just a simple general when it came to strategy. But in front of Wang Chong, Cheng Qianli had to admit that his intelligence was simply not enough. Chapter 1028. My lord, you'll understand in the future that Dawissili is a schemer and extremely suspicious. It's impossible to deceive such a top general with ordinary methods. In order to trick him step by step, one must use some extraordinary methods. If my guess is correct, after seeing the formation phenomena of the army and the formation phenomena in the sky, Dawissili's suspicions should have dissipated, and he should have begun to cultivate. Wang Chong stood up from the giant rock and lightly jumped down, his expression relaxed. If you want a lion to take the bait, you must let the lion eat the meat, and the hook must be buried in the meat. Cheng Qianli was taken aback, but then he understood. The Six Mysteries version of formation phenomena. This thought flashed through Wang Chong's mind. This was the content of the letter he had sent to Dawissili. In the apocalyptic era, although the earth had withered and the people had been plunged into misery and suffering, martial arts had reached an unprecedented peak. In the process of the emergence of the formation phenomena, countless geniuses had contributed their own wisdom and researched different versions of it. Among all the versions of formation phenomena, there was one that everyone in the apocalyptic era knew of. It was the version developed by a recluse called Master Lucien. To a certain extent, the fame of this version even surpassed the true version of formation phenomena. The reason for this was not because this version of formation phenomena was powerful, nor was it because there was something special about it. Rather, it was because it was the most misleading version of all the later versions of formation phenomena. In the early stages of the research and development of formation phenomena, there were many difficulties and many problems, and the progress was unsatisfactory. There were even many people who believed that formation phenomena had already been lost, and that it was impossible for them to reappear. It was at this time that the Six Mysteries version of formation phenomena appeared. The obvious enhancement effect, and the vast phenomena, left everyone gasping in amazement. Many martial artists who were studying formation phenomena put down their work and went over in admiration. After the initial verification of the Six Mysteries version of formation phenomena, this version was rapidly disseminated in the army, and esteemed Six Mysteries was also greatly praised. Because of this version, the research and development of formation phenomena came to a complete halt. At that time, everyone believed that formation phenomena had finally seen the light of day, and that the Six Mysteries version was the ultimate form. But soon, this version of formation phenomena revealed its massive natural flaw and terrifying consequences. It was as if there was a path that led straight to the top of the mountain in a dense forest filled with thorns. Everyone's joy was imaginable, but no one expected that this path would lead to a high cliff. After cultivating formation phenomena for 1 to 3 months, the various consequences of the Six Mysteries version began to appear, including chaotic stellar energy, knotted meridians, and reverse blood qi flow. After a period of time, the symptoms rapidly worsened, and in the end, a large number of people who cultivated formation phenomena began to suffer from cultivation deviation, their bodies becoming paralyzed. This scene shocked everyone, and the army issued an urgent order to stop all cultivation of the Six Mysteries version of formation phenomena. But the consequences had already been created. At the beginning, everyone believed that there was some flaw in the Six Mysteries version of formation phenomena, and everyone invested their intelligence in the hope of finding the problem and fixing the flaw. But reality was completely different from what they had imagined. The more they studied the Six Mysteries version of formation phenomena, the more they discovered that it had an innate flaw that could not be fixed. It had completely led everyone onto a different path, and they would never be able to reach the true end. The deeper they cultivated, the higher their strength increased, the greater the disaster they would suffer, to the point where it was difficult to turn back, and they had completely lost the chance to turn back. 1, 2, 3. More and more people discovered the flaw in the Six Mysteries version of formation phenomena, and in the end, even esteemed Six Mysteries discovered the problem. Esteemed Six Mysteries was filled with guilt. Although he had good intentions and hadn't intended for this to happen, the damage he had caused was beyond his wildest imagination. No one blamed him, but not long after, esteemed Six Mysteries disappeared without a trace, and no one knew where he had gone. After the Six Mysteries version of formation phenomena, everyone learned their lesson and began their research anew. Although it had taken a long time and been delayed by esteemed Six Mysteries matter, with everyone's combined strength, the ancient power of formation phenomena had seen the light of day once more. A person like Wuxia was as cunning as a fox, and if he wasn't given some benefits, he would never take the bait. More importantly, Wang Chong knew that long before the apocalypse, Wuxia had sent people into the interior to search for those people who were researching formation phenomena and rob them. Later on, when the Six Mysteries version of formation phenomena appeared, Wuxia had been one of the people who had actively cultivated it. For a person who was so obsessed with formation phenomena, to encounter the Six Mysteries version of formation phenomena, the effects could be imagined. Now that Wang Chong had given him the Six Mysteries version of formation phenomena, it would be strange if Wuxia could hold back. If everything went as expected, once Wuxia began to cultivate it, the flaws of the Six Mysteries version would begin to show on Wuxia. This celestial wolf great general of the Western Turks would find it difficult to maintain his peak great general level. Everything had been decided the moment Wuxia had kidnapped Chen Bin. All that was left was to wait for the final result. So Wuxia was already part of your plan. Since this is the case, I will report this to Lord Protector General in a little while. In the future, there will be no need to send anyone to investigate the Western Turks. Cheng Qianli's expression relaxed, and he paused for a moment before continuing. That's right, there's another matter. A special guest has come to the city of Talis. Lord Protector General has asked me to invite you over. Oh. Wang Chong froze, his curiosity piqued. Talis was currently a dangerous place for military strategists, and he truly had no idea who would come at a time like this, much less make Gao Xianji send Cheng Qianli to invite him. Let's go. The mood in the main hall of Talis was solemn. The moment Wang Chong stepped in, he immediately saw the guest that Cheng Qianli had spoken of. But even though Wang Chong had mentally prepared himself, he still couldn't help but be flabbergasted at the sight of this guest. The guest that Cheng Qianli spoke of was around 1.8 meters tall, with a slender figure, deep blue eyes, long wavy hair, and a thick beard. He stood out like a sore thumb in the hall. In terms of appearance, this person was completely different from the Tang people. On the contrary, he was rather similar to the greatest foe of the Tang dynasty, the Arabs. But a moment later, Wang Chong's eyes flickered as he glanced at the cloth this person was wearing, a thought flitting through his mind. Lord Protector General, this is. Wang Chong turned his head to Gao Xianji, who was seated at a long table in the hall, a questioning look in his eyes. Wang Chong, you've come at just the right time. Not too long ago, this person charged into the city and was almost mistaken for an Arab and killed by our men. This person kept shouting and acting strangely, so we went to find Wen Shuyang. Wen Shuyang told us that he was not an Arab, but a Khorasani, and that he had important information to tell us. But he always emphasized that he would only speak if he saw you. Otherwise he would rather die than speak. Oh! A hint of surprise flashed through Wang Chong's eyes, and he quickly turned to the Khorasani. As expected, when he had first seen this person, Wang Chong had already guessed that he really was a Khorasani. But there was one thing that Wang Chong did not understand. Khorasan was extremely far to the west of Talis, and it was one of the heartland of the Arabian Empire. Even the merchants of the Tang dynasty on the Silk Road rarely went there, much less Wang Chong. Wang Chong truly did not understand how these Khorasani, whom he had never interacted with, knew of him, and insisted on meeting him. Marquis, I've asked around. He truly is a Khorasani. I traveled there in my early years, and the Khorasani are different from the Arabs. He might really be able to provide us with some assistance. A familiar voice rang out beside his ear. It was Yuan Shusong, who was dressed in a loose robe and had a cultured and refined aura. You are that young commander of the Tang dynasty? At this moment, the statue-like Khorasani in the hall suddenly spoke, his green eyes staring at Wang Chong. Wen Shuyang was taken aback, and he quickly took on the role of translator. You know of me? Wang Chong nodded in surprise. No. To his surprise, the Khorasani shook his head. But I've heard of you. You defeated the governor of Iron and Blood Abu Muslim at Talis. Abu Muslim is an important minister of Arabia, and also the foe of our Khorasan. He has never suffered a defeat in his life, and has destroyed countless countries. For you to defeat him means that you are a supreme hero. Wang Chong froze for a moment, and then he began to smile. This was the first time he had heard such a high evaluation from a Khorasani to the west of the Tsong Mountains. Our people said that you wanted to see me, and that you have extremely important information. What is this information you speak of? Wang Chong got straight to the point. Abu Muslim is our foe. It was he who led the Arab army to destroy our Sassanid dynasty. While you were fighting with the Arabs on the front lines, the Arab Mamelukes and other soldiers were slaughtering our people in the rear. All of Khorasan is littered with corpses. You and us, we have a common enemy. The tall and thin Khorasani said, his eyes red. Everyone in the hall glanced at each other in surprise. No one had expected such a thing to happen in Khorasan behind the Arabs. As for what Wang Chong had sensed, few people in this era knew of Khorasan. As for the Sassanid dynasty, very few people, including Gao Xianji, knew of it. But Wang Chong knew that at another time, this name had a thunderous and even more illustrious name. Persia. But what moved Wang Chong the most was not this. Rather, it was the words that the Khorasani had mentioned. The Mamluk army. No wonder I haven't seen them. They were suppressing the Khorasani uprising in the rear. Chapter 1029. In Wang Chong's memories, The Mamelukes, the strongest force of cavalry on the continent, should have appeared here during the Battle of Talas. But because of his interference, Gao Xinji's entry into the city of Talas, the battle had begun much earlier, and the behemoth army had appeared while the Mamelukes had remained in the rear to suppress the Khorasani uprising. Everything had gone completely awry, and Khorasan was unquestionably another variable. The Arabs are extremely ambitious, and their thirst for war and conquest knows no bounds. This time it was our Sassanid dynasty that fell, and next time, it will be your eastern world. Talas is only the beginning, not the end. The Khorasani continued, his expression extremely solemn. In the hall, Wang Chong and Gao Xinji discreetly glanced at each other. This Khorasani truly was rather special. His judgment of the Arabs was exactly the same as that of Wang Chong and Gao Xinji. What do you hope to obtain? Wang Chong suddenly asked. I hope that we can work together to deal with the Arabs. The tall and thin Khorasani sternly said. All of you might not know this, but although Abu Muslim has been temporarily defeated, he has already begun to recruit new soldiers. One of the strongest governors of Arabia, the governor of War, Qutayba, and governor of Cairo Osman, have already led soldiers to Talas to reinforce Abu Muslim. Qutayba has an illustrious reputation in Arabia, and he is even stronger than Abu Muslim. All the countries he has conquered from top to bottom have been slaughtered, leaving no one alive. More importantly, they have many fierce generals under their command, and their soldiers are extremely powerful. With the soldiers of these two people and Abu Muslims, in the next battle, you will see at least 400,000 soldiers at Talas. Buzz! Everyone in the hall, including Wang Chong and Gao Xinji, paled at these words. In the last war, the Tang dynasty, the Uzan, the Western Turks, and the Arabs had all suffered grievous losses. If Abu Muslim only had this small number of soldiers, he wouldn't have much of an effect on the Tang dynasty. But if the three sides joined forces, and the Arabs mustered another 400,000 soldiers, this war would become extremely disadvantageous to the Tang. At the very least, the Tang dynasty's forces at Talas could not deal with 400,000 Arab soldiers. Moreover, one Abu Muslim was already very difficult to deal with. If two more Arab governors came, they wouldn't even dare to think about it. In addition, Abu Muslim's defeat has attracted the attention of the Caliph. Before, he had only treated you as an ordinary country of the East, but now that Qutayba and Osman had arrived, it was clear that the Caliph now viewed you as Arabia's strongest foe. The only time three governors working together on an expedition to the East is when the Arabs conquered our Sassanid dynasty. The tall and thin Khorasani sternly said. Khorasan was now part of Arabia's territory. In the Arabian Empire, which spanned more than 10 million square kilometers, Khorasan was definitely one of its core regions. It was possible to gather information that the Tang dynasty could not. In addition, the Arabs are warlike by nature and cannot accept defeat. You have already stimulated their ambition to conquer the East. Many Arab governors are already paying attention to this place. If you cannot hold Talas and completely defeat Qutayba and Abu Muslim, then many more governors will follow. Their soldiers will continue to pour into the East until they conquer the entire Eastern world. Rumble! The Khorasani's words immediately set off a massive uproar in the hall. Bastard! These Arabs are too arrogant. Do they think that the Tang dynasty is one of those small countries they've encountered before? If not for Goguryeo, Uzan, Mengshi Zhao, and the Eastern and Western Turkic Khaganates holding them back, would the Tang dynasty be unable to deal with Abu Muslim? Arabia has many governors, but does the Tang dynasty not have any other great generals? The Crown Prince's Grand Guardian Wang Zhongxi is still in the capital. The Tongluo still has 20,000 elite cavalry, and the capital has 100,000 imperial army soldiers. Does the Arabs think that the Tang dynasty is one of those small countries? If it weren't for the fact that we can't mobilize our soldiers, the Arabs would be nothing. The generals in the hall were seething with rage. Only Wang Chong and Gao Xinji remained silent, their hearts heavy. The Tang dynasty did not lack soldiers, nor did it lack top-class great generals. The anger of these generals also illustrated the predicament that the Tang dynasty was in. It had far too many enemies. 80% of the 600,000 soldiers and great generals of the Tang dynasty were tied up on the border. The people of the Central Plains were farmers, completely different from the nomadic tribes of the Turks and Arabs. The armies of the Central Plains were primarily defensive, and their greater responsibility was to protect the ordinary people who farmed. They were not like the Turks and Arabs who lived and died in battle, whose mission was to expand and conquer. The Arabs could mobilize a large number of soldiers in a single battle, 60 to 80% of their forces. But the Tang dynasty was different. It was already quite impressive that they could mobilize 2 imperial great generals for a war on the border. This was a fact that had not changed in Wang Chong's memories, not even after several thousand years had passed. "How do you wish for us to work together?" Wang Chong suddenly asked, his voice solemn. Wang Chong had never interacted with the Khorasani before, but Wang Chong had heard of them. The Khorasani were brave, warlike, and fearless of death. The fact that they were able to stubbornly resist decades after being conquered by the Arabs was proof enough. In the areas conquered by the Arabs, this sort of situation was extremely rare. In Khorasan, our Sassanid dynasty still has one last force, around 8,000 Assyrian cataphracts. This is the strongest force of our Sassanid dynasty, and the force that the Arabs most desire to find and destroy. The reason they mobilized the Mamelukes is to deal with our Assyrian cataphracts. After a few moments of silence, the tall and thin Khorasani suddenly said something that no one expected. Towards the end of the Arab conquest of our Sassanid dynasty, the emperor, for the sake of restoring the dynasty, personally ordered the Assyrian cataphracts to go into hiding. Thus, even after the fall of the empire, the Arabs were never able to find this legendary force of heavy cavalry of the Sassanid dynasty. This was a sore point for the caliph. In the last few decades, no matter how many soldiers the Arabs have stationed in Khorasan, we have always been able to deal them a heavy blow. The Assyrian cataphracts are our last force and cannot be mobilized lightly. But if you can defeat the Arabs at Talas, defeat Qutayba, Abu Muslim, and Osman, we can mobilize the Assyrian cataphracts and coordinate with you to deal them a heavy blow when they retreat. Boom! The moment the tall and thin Khorasani spoke, the voice of the Stone of Destiny rang out in Wang Chong's ears. Side mission, Assyrian cataphracts begin. This is the last force of the Sassanid dynasty, and the greatest reliance of the Khorasani. It has been tempered by fire and blood, and it has achieved countless glories. This is the last bloodline of a dynasty. User has defeated Abu Muslim and dealt a heavy blow to the Arabs, drawing their attention. This is the last hope of the Khorasani. The Khorasani wish to ally with the Tang dynasty, but they are also cautious. Only by completing the second mission and defeating the Arabs will User be able to obtain the final trust of the Khorasani. In the future, this will be User's firmest ally in the western regions and the Tsong Mountains. For mission success, User will be rewarded with 2,000 points of destiny energy and the assistance of the legendary Assyrian cataphracts. For mission failure, 4,000 points of destiny energy will be deducted. In addition, the world shackles will be added to the list. Note, there is only one chance. If the mission fails, User will no longer have any contact with the Khorasani. This is the first and last time that the Khorasani will extend an olive branch of goodwill to the Tang dynasty. The voice continued to howl down like a waterfall, but no one but Wang Chong could hear it. Wang Chong stood there in a daze, completely dumbfounded. This was not because of the Stone of Destiny's voice, but because of the information it had revealed. The Assyrian cataphracts. They could definitely rank in the top 3 of the continent's cavalry. As a nomadic and warlike people, the Sassanid dynasty shared many similarities with the Arabian Empire, including the strength of their cavalry. Before Wang Chong ascended to the position of Grand Marshal of the world and became the war saint, he had read about the various factions and civilizations, including the fallen Sassanid dynasty. The strongest cavalry of the Sassanid dynasty were the Assyrian cataphracts, just like the Mamelukes of the Arabian Empire. The two were different methods of achieving the same result, and they were equally powerful in battle. There was even a rumor that the Mamelukes had borrowed a lot of inspiration from the nearby Iswaran cataphracts of the Sassanid dynasty. This was because the Iswaran cataphracts had been established and flourished much earlier than the Mamelukes. But in Wang Chong's understanding, this most powerful force of the Sassanid dynasty had vanished decades ago, buried in the dust of history. But Wang Chong had never imagined that he would hear news of the Iswaran cataphracts in this manner. Wang Chong said nothing, only glanced at Gao Xianji, both of them seeing the same meaning in each other's eyes. The Tang dynasty had just experienced a major war in the southwest, and was currently short on soldiers. No matter what sort of request the Khorasani had, it would have no effect on the Tang dynasty. Moreover, if they could obtain the help of these Khorasani, they would be able to plant a nail in the heart of the Arabian Empire, allowing them to obtain, at any time, a large amount of information that the Tang dynasty currently lacked. Yuanqing, make arrangements to take him away and receive him well. In addition, Sir Yuan, please tell him that we agree to his request for an alliance. I am confident that the Tang dynasty and the Sassanid dynasty will be able to establish a firm friendship. Yes. Chapter 1030. Translated by Hypersheep 325. Shi Yuanqing and Wen Shuyang had already brought the Khorasani into the inner hall, where he was received by Shi Yuanqing and Wen Shuyang. After asking him a few questions, the Khorasani was quietly escorted out of the city. Wang Chong, you also heard what that Khorasani said. The situation is not good for us. After sending off the Khorasani, Gao Xianji sat down in front of his desk, his brow tightly furrowed in concern. Everyone had seen just how powerful Abu Muslim was. One of his punches could even contend against the giant ape. Add in 2 governors of the same level, and even more soldiers, and the current state of Talas would not be able to hold out against such a force. Wang Chong said nothing, but his eyes were also filled with concern. How could he not know what Gao Xianji had said? The Arabs could mobilize far more soldiers than the Tang dynasty could. We only have 2 choices at the moment. The first option was to immediately withdraw and return to the Great Tang before the Arabs arrived in force. Given the current strength of Dalawan Ruozan and the Western Turks, we will find it very difficult to stop them. Gao Xianji said, but if we do this, we will lose the city of Talas. This strategic fortress is at the throat of the Arabs' eastward advance. Once we leave, it will be very difficult to find such a strategic location. Moreover, once we cross the Tsong Mountains, we will enter the interior of Anxi. Right now, we have to stop the Arabs at Talas so that nothing changes in the western regions. But once the Arabs enter Anxi, it's hard to say if the kingdoms of the western regions will still be able to maintain their neutrality. Wang Chong shook his head. How could he not have thought of what Gao Xianji said? However, this path simply wasn't feasible. At Talas, the Arabs were currently facing only Arabia, the Western Turks and the Izan. But if they retreated to the western regions, the Tang dynasty would have to face the kingdoms of the western regions as well. At that time, the situation was probably even worse than it was now. Sai, I wanted to discuss it with you, but you've already thought of it. On the way to Talas, you should have seen that the entire western regions is in chaos. Talas has not yet been defeated, and I am still here, but the western regions are already like this. If we retreat to the western regions, the countries will only become more chaotic. They might even be bribed by the Arabs to attack us, just like the Karluks. At that time, we will truly have internal and external troubles. The Tang dynasty has been operating in the western regions for more than 200 years. In the end, it proved that everyone's rule was a failure. After saying this, Gao Xianji raised his head and let out a long sigh, revealing a deep sense of frustration and disappointment. He had been operating in the western regions for 10-some years, and had been hailed as the Anxi war god. But after the Battle of Talas, he had been unable to recruit anyone other than a few mercenaries. Among all the countries, no one was willing to join the war and help the Tang dynasty. On the contrary, once the Tang dynasty retreated to the western regions, they might defect to the Arabs. This was truly a failure. How could someone as proud as Gao Xianji endure this? Wang Chong's lips parted, but he hesitated. The Tang dynasty was still too soft on the western regions. There was a saying that went, "The who fear might, but they do not cherish virtue." The people of the Central Plains had spent several thousand years to understand this morality. Benevolence and righteousness prevailed in the Central Plains, and it was taken for granted that the people of the western regions would be like the Central Plains, benevolent and righteous. This was completely wishful thinking. In the western regions there was only one law: strength is revered. The countries of the western regions only needed to attach themselves to the strongest person. As for softness and benevolence, they had no meaning to them. They were two different civilizations, yet they took it for granted. It would be strange if they could succeed. But with a war at hand, this was not the time to discuss such matters. Moreover, there were many reasons for the policy of softness in the western regions, and Gao Xinji could not be completely blamed for it. "My lord, there is no need to blame yourself. The Tang dynasty has not reached that level, and we may not necessarily lose this war. As for the matter of Anxi, it is not too late to consider it after this war is over." Wang Chong comforted him. Gao Xinji nodded, quickly regaining his composure. He had always been calm and composed in front of outsiders, rarely revealing his inner weaknesses, even in front of Qing Qianli and Feng Changqing. To be able to say these words to Wang Chong, he clearly regarded Wang Chong as a peer, a confidant with whom he could discuss many issues. Although Qing Qianli and Feng Changqing were not bad and had their own talents, when it came to the art of war, deployment, martial arts and strategy, they were still a little lacking. So when Gao Xinji talked in front of them, he still held back a little. Only Wang Chong could make Gao Xinji treat him so calmly and divulge everything, no matter how big or small. The situation truly hasn't reached that stage yet. But for us, Talas is far better than the western regions for the decisive battle. Moreover, once we retreat to the western regions, the Arabs can take a detour at any time and advance into Longxi or the interior, which is even more disadvantageous to us. No matter what, we cannot leave Talas. Gao Xinji sternly said. Thus there is only one path left. We must report the situation to the imperial court as quickly as possible and request reinforcements. Wang Chong nodded. He and Gao Xinji shared the same view on this point. Abu Muslim was the Arab governor of the east, and he commanded the soldiers of a region, just like the Anxi Protectorate Army and the Qixi Protectorate of the Tang dynasty. But if other governors were added to the mix, the situation would be completely different. Based on what that Khorasani had said, Qutayba commanded the soldiers of the north, equivalent to Abu Muslim. And there was also Governor Osman of Cairo. Moreover, the Caliph of Arabia was preparing to send the Mamelukes. The nature of this battle had completely changed at this moment. The war had officially escalated from a local war to a large-scale frontal battle between armies. The Arabs had gathered at least 30 to 40% of their soldiers. Just the soldiers of Wang Chong and Gao Xinji were far from enough to deal with such a massive force. Lord Protector General, and I coincidentally share the same view. But my seniority in the army is too shallow, and I simply cannot persuade the imperial court. I fear that I will require Lord Protector General's cooperation in this matter. Wang Chong sternly said. Be at ease. I will join you in writing a grievous complaint. This battle is of the utmost importance. Just like that Khorasani said, the Arabs have boundless ambitions. If they can capture Talas, the Arabs will have allies in Uzan and the Western Turks to the east of the Tsong Mountains, and then all the Arab armies will march east. The Tang dynasty will probably encounter a foe it has not encountered in centuries. Gao Xinji worriedly said. As an outstanding great general, Gao Xinji had a sharper and more far-sighted vision than many others. I am only worried that the ministers of the court have not participated in the battle, and simply do not understand the gravity of this battle. Nor do they understand what awaits us if we lose this battle. At that time, it will not be as simple as winning the Battle of Talas. When a tiger shows an opening, the pack of wolves will pounce. Moreover, there are also people from King Qi's faction in the court, and they love to scheme, even more than the safety of the country. Based on their past behavior, I'm afraid that they will definitely think of all kinds of ways to obstruct us from submitting the petition. In addition, the imperial court currently has no soldiers to use. Gao Xianji gave a deep sigh. For the Battle of Talas, he had sent several dozen letters requesting reinforcements from the imperial court. In the end, only Wang Chang's Qixi Protectorate, Wuxiang's cavalry, and the soldiers the imperial court had mobilized had arrived with, a total of only 60,000 soldiers. As for the other 60,000 soldiers, they had all been hired from the western regions by Wang Chong at great expense. Given his status as Anqi Protector General and his 2 months of work, this was all he had gotten. One could easily imagine the situation the Tang dynasty was in. Wang Chong fell silent. In a flash, the hall was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. He naturally understood the problem Gao Xianji was talking about, but the Tang dynasty was not Arabia. They had far too many restraints. The Tang dynasty had many enemies on its borders, and if the armies of the various countries were added together, they would probably number 2 to 3 million. It was already quite impressive that the Tang dynasty could use this number of soldiers to hold them down. Not only that, just as Gao Xianji had said, King Qi was still a massive obstacle. It seems like I can't keep him around any longer, Wang Chong quietly said to himself, a thought suddenly flashing through his mind. If the Tang dynasty wanted to revive and survive the calamity, King Qi's faction would always be a massive obstacle. For the first time, Wang Chong felt that King Qi was a massive threat. Whether it was for the Central Plains or the Tang dynasty, King Qi could no longer remain in the imperial court. Lord Protector General, be at ease. Even if King Qi's faction obstructs the imperial court, I have my own ways to resolve the matter. I just need Lord Protector General to prepare 2 letters for me. Seeing Gao Xianji's curious and inquisitive gaze, Wang Chong did not hide anything. The other letter is for my grandfather. Gao Xianji froze for a moment before understanding dawned on him, and a look of respect appeared on his face. Duke Jiao of the Tang dynasty was the prime minister of the Golden Age, a minister who had once served the emperor. At the same time, he was an important minister who had worked together with the Holy Emperor to forge the glory of the Tang dynasty. There was no one in the world who did not know of his name. If Duke Jiao were to step forward, the situation would truly be different. Gao Xianji said sincerely, the world had witnessed Duke Jiao's achievements back then. Without his dedicated assistance, the Great Tang would have found it very difficult to achieve the golden age of the world's number 1 and the world's tributes. Moreover, Duke Jiao's achievements weren't limited to politics and governance. He had also made outstanding contributions to the military. As a virtuous minister, Duke Jiao had played a major role in the long-term stability of the Tang dynasty. More importantly, if not for the Holy Emperor's efforts to salvage the situation, and hope that Duke Jiao would continue to assist him in the name of the people, Duke Jiao would have already retired long ago. But even so, Duke Jiao rarely interfered in the affairs of the Four Quarters Embassy. Unless it was an extremely important matter, Duke Jiao would never interfere. Chapter 1031. Lord Protector General, in the current situation, we can only transfer soldiers from the border. You have great seniority in the army, and have dealings with the other Protector Generals. I wonder if you can get some soldiers from the other Protector Generals? Wang Chong said. The army of the Tang dynasty was a mixture of Hu and Han, and Wang Chong's status was too sensitive. Because of his background, Gao Xianji was more likely to speak to him than Wang Chong. Moreover, he had great seniority in the army, and had dealings with the generals and Protector Generals of the various regions. In this aspect, not even Wang Chong, who was a genius in the art of war, could compare to him. The Biting Protectorate currently has the most soldiers, and I have some dealings with Biting Protector General in Sishan. I'll negotiate with him on this matter. If the Biting Protectorate only has a small number of soldiers, we should be able to borrow them. I estimate that we should be able to get 4,000 to 6,000 soldiers. Gao Xianji said after a few moments of thought. If we can only borrow 4,000 to 6,000 soldiers, then we'll transfer the most elite soldiers. This way, the Biting Protectorate won't be too affected. Wang Chong sternly said. Gao Xianji nodded. Quality over quantity was the most important factor in soldiers. He shared the same view as Wang Chong. Moreover, the Anqi Protectorate Army had been carefully selected from the soldiers of the various regions of the Tang dynasty. If quantity was not an issue, then quality was an issue that Gao Xianji had always adhered to. There's also Geshu Han. He's garrisoned in Longxi. Other than the Biting Protectorate, he's the closest to us. Moreover, the Big Dipper Army has astonishing fighting power. They should be able to provide us with some assistance. Gao Xianji was quiet for a few moments, a hint of hesitation in his eyes. But I rarely interact with Geshu Han, so I'm afraid that it'll be very difficult to convince him. Leave this matter to me. Wang Chong smiled. He already knew what was going on. Of all the Hu generals, Geshu Han could be said to be the most unique. He had admired the culture of the Central Plains from a young age, and he spoke with a perfect capital accent that was even better than his own. He was promoted by the Crown Prince's junior protector, Wang Zhongxi. Although he joined the army late, he was promoted very quickly because he had the support of the war god of the Tang dynasty. In addition, unlike the other Hu, where most of the soldiers were Hu, Geshu Han's Big Dipper Army had over 90% Han soldiers. This was completely different from the others. Thus, on the surface, whether it was Gao Xianji, Foman Linta, and Sis Han, or the other Hu generals, although they all had dealings with Geshu Han, there was a slight estrangement in their hearts. Geshu Han was well aware of this fact, so he rarely interacted with them. He would never contact them unless absolutely necessary. I still have some friendship with Geshu Han. I should be able to get some soldiers from him, Wang Chong said. Gao Xianji was flabbergasted, but then he thought of something and understood. In the battle between the Big Dipper Army and White Lion Great General Witadra Konglo, the Big Dipper Army had suffered heavy losses. Many people knew that Wang Chong had gifted 10,000 high-quality Turkic warhorses to Geshu Han. Geshu Han's Big Dipper Army only had 20,000 some soldiers in total. Wang Chong's gift of 10,000 horses to him was like sending charcoal in snowy weather. In this aspect, Geshu Han owed him a favor. But even so, we still don't have enough men. Gao Xianji raised his head to the heavens and sighed. Even if he could get 6,000 soldiers from the Biting Protectorate and 3,000 from Geshu Han, he would only have 9,000 soldiers. This was a drop in the bucket for the current war. Haha, Lord Protector General, there will always be a way out. The Tang dynasty is still the Tang dynasty, and it's still far from being at the end of its rope. Right now, it's just that the other sides are holding back its soldiers, not that it has no soldiers to use. As long as we make some adjustments, we'll be able to get quite a few soldiers. The Tang dynasty has no soldiers to use. But didn't I bring 100,000 soldiers with me? The urgent task at hand is to discuss how to report to the imperial court. To Gao Xianji's surprise, Wang Chong smiled. You're right. Gao Xianji froze for a moment, and then he began to smile. Time slowly passed, and the two highest commanders of the Tang dynasty in Talas continued to discuss the details from night to dawn. After discussing for an entire night, the two finally went to sleep. Walala. Soon at daybreak, eagles began to fly out of Talas in every direction. Translated by Hypersheep 325 Flap Flap. As the place closest to Talas, Feng Chongqing was the first to receive the news. Enlist soldiers from the countries of the western regions. When Feng Chongqing opened the letter and saw that it was written by Gao Xianji himself, he froze. The contents of Gao Xianji's letter were extremely simple. He hoped that Feng Chongqing would use the name of the Anqi Protectorate Army and the Tang dynasty to enlist soldiers from the countries of the western regions. In return, the Anqi Protectorate Army would heavily reward the countries with gold after victory. How much gold and silver does Anqi have right now? When Feng Chongqing saw this letter, he smiled bitterly in his heart. As Gao Xianji's chief advisor for administration and logistics, no one understood Anqi's current situation better than Feng Chongqing. Although it had conquered the wealthy Shi kingdom, a significant portion of its wealth had been taken away through the tunnels by the nobles of the Shi kingdom. As a result, the Anqi Protectorate Army's harvest was far less than the rumors claimed. After the war, at least half of the wealth had been offered to the imperial court and imperial household by Gao Xianji, and nearly half of the rest had been given to Bian Lingqing by Gao Xianji. Bian Lingqing was an important aid to Gao Xianji's career, but he was extremely greedy. Just this little bit of wealth was not enough to satisfy him. As for the last quarter, Gao Xianji kept a portion for himself and distributed the rest to the soldiers of the Anqi Protectorate Army, as well as the Karluks and Ferganians who had accompanied the army. Thus, the Anqi Protectorate Army had no more money to recruit soldiers. If not for this, Feng Changqing would not have been so helpless in the rear. The countries of the western regions have always been greedy, and there's no one who doesn't like gold and silver. Although I can trick them into enlisting some soldiers, once the war is over, the Anqi Protectorate Army won't be able to take out this sum of money. Feng Changqing worriedly looked at the letter in his hand. The recruitment that Gao Xianji had mentioned was a private recruitment by the Anqi Protectorate Army. It had not been approved by the Bureau of Military Personnel and was not part of the plan. The imperial court would not pay for it, so the Anqi Protectorate Army could only think of a way. The countries of the western regions didn't have many soldiers in the first place, and they wouldn't be able to recruit many. If this was left as a source of gossip, the Anqi Protectorate Army would lose all its prestige in the western regions. Even if they won, it would leave behind many problems. In Feng Changqing's view, this was not a good idea. A moment later, when Feng Changqing saw the last line of the letter, he froze. Changqing, there's no need to worry. The young Marquis has already made arrangements for the money needed for recruitment. The young Marquis has already stated everything in his letter. It was such a simple line of words, but it immediately stunned Feng Changqing. When had the Protector General become so close to Wang Chong? Hadn't there been a gap between them before? And what was going on with the money needed for recruitment? What did it mean that Wang Chong had already stated everything in his letter? Feng Changqing was stunned for a moment, but he quickly realized what was going on. Could it be that Talis had not sent one letter, but two? Feng Changqing flipped through the envelope, and sure enough, he found another letter underneath the original envelope. The handwriting on this letter was completely different from Gao Xianji's. Although it was crooked and twisted, it still had a vigorous demeanor. It was the young Marquis. Feng Changqing quickly took up the letter and began to read through it. At the start, Feng Changqing was only casually skimming through the letter, but as he read, he became more and more serious, his expression more and more solemn. He even read through the letter 3 or 4 times. Haha! Demand war reparations from the Arabs, and use the war reparations to pay the recruitment fees of the countries of the western regions. Young Marquis, to think that you could think of such a method. But there's no better plan than this. Feng Changqing slammed the letter on the table and couldn't help but laugh. He had always believed that his governance of the western regions was unconventional and unconventional, but he had never imagined that Wang Chong would be even more unconventional. After the victory of a war, he would demand reparations from the losing side to make up for the losses suffered in the war. This sort of method had never been used in the Tang dynasty, and Wang Chong had called it using war to raise war. Wang Chong had made it very clear in his letter that if the Tang dynasty lost the western regions, and the countries of the western regions surrendered to Arabia, there would naturally be no need to worry about the issue of recruitment fees. And if they won, they could further demand money from the Arabs to pay the compensation to the countries of the western regions. Thus, the problem that Feng Changqing was worried about was completely non-existent. The Tang dynasty had operated in the western regions for more than 200 years, and now was the time for the countries of the western regions to fight for the Tang dynasty and pay a little. Young Marquis, let's do as you say. Feng Changqing's eyes were bright as he quickly took a brush made of wolf hair from a nearby brush rack and began to write on the paper. Flap flap. Carrier pigeons flew through the sky, following the silk road eastward. Soon, they reached the border of Qixi, where several eagles broke off from the flock and shot down. It's finally about to begin. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.